My name is Chelsea, and I am 34 years old. After surviving a horrific car accident, I lay bleeding in a hospital bed, terrified for my 8-week-old baby waiting at home. When I called my parents for help, my own mother sighed and told me she did not have time for my drama because she had a Caribbean cruise to catch. She told me to call a neighbor. I did not cry. Instead, I picked up my phone, canceled the $3,800 monthly payment I had been sending them for 9 years, and cut off the $410,400 gravy train. Hours later, my grandfather walked into my hospital room and revealed a secret that would allow me to destroy my toxic family forever. If you have ever been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I turned my darkest moment into the ultimate reckoning. The first thing I registered was the blinding, violent glare of fluorescent lights cutting through my closed eyelids. Then came the rhythmic, terrifying beep of a heart monitor that seemed to be echoing directly inside my skull. I tried to lift my right hand to block the harsh light, but a searing, white-hot agony tore through my shoulder, forcing a ragged gasp from my dry throat. My collarbone was fractured in 2 places, and my head throbbed with the heavy, sickening pressure of a severe concussion. A stiff, uncomfortable cervical collar kept my neck completely immobilized. Slowly, the memories of the past hour rushed back in disjointed, terrifying flashes. I remembered driving through the intersection on a green light. I remembered the sudden, deafening screech of tires from my left. I remembered the massive silver SUV running the red light, slamming into the driver's side of my car with the force of a freight train. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass still rang in my ears, followed by the suffocating smell of deployed airbags and burning rubber. I had been on my way home from a quick run to the pharmacy, a rare 20-minute errand I had allowed myself while leaving my newborn son at home. Leo. The name hit me harder than the physical impact of the crash itself. My baby boy was only 8 weeks old. He was at home with Megan, the 16-year-old girl from down the street, who occasionally babysat for short stretches. I forced my heavy eyelids open, squinting against the harsh hospital lights, and desperately scanned the sterile emergency room bay for a clock. The red digital numbers mounted on the pale blue wall read 4:40 in the afternoon. My heart dropped into my stomach, a cold wave of pure maternal panic washing over my battered body. Megan told me she had to leave exactly at 5 o'clock for a mandatory family dinner. I had 20 minutes. 20 minutes before my tiny, defenseless infant would be left with a panicked teenager who needed to go home and had no idea where I was. I tried to shift my weight to sit up, but the pain radiated down my spine and across my chest, stealing my breath. My left arm was scraped and bruised but functional. I patted down the thin hospital gown and the scratchy blankets, frantically searching for my belongings. A nurse must have placed my purse on the small rolling tray table next to my bed. Gritting my teeth against the nauseating throb in my head, I reached over with my good hand, my fingers fumbling blindly until they closed around the familiar shape of my smartphone. The screen was cracked from the collision, but it lit up. I had to call my parents. Barbara and David. My mother and father lived just 15 minutes away from my house. They resided in a lavish, heavily gated suburban community, a neighborhood of sprawling, manicured lawns and massive brick facades that projected an image of absolute perfection and wealth. It was an image I knew intimately because I was the one secretly maintaining it. For 9 years, I had been transferring $3,800 to them every single month. They claimed they were on the brink of losing my childhood home to foreclosure, and as a successful logistics director, I felt obligated to save them. They relied on my stable income to keep their pristine world from crumbling, yet they constantly treated my career as nothing more than a boring, necessary chore compared to the supposedly glamorous life of my younger sister Ashley. But right now, none of that financial resentment mattered. I did not care about the unfairness or the emotional coldness that usually defined our relationship. I was a desperate mother, and they were the only family nearby who could reach Leo in time. My hands trembled violently as I scrolled through my contacts and tapped my mother's name. The phone began to ring. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Each endless tone stretched my anxiety thinner. I pictured their massive quiet house, wondering if she was ignoring the call or simply away from her phone. Please answer, I whispered to the empty hospital room, my breath catching in my throat. Please just pick up the phone. On the sixth ring, the line finally connected. But instead of a greeting, I was met with an audible, heavy sigh of irritation. Chelsea, what is it? Barbara snapped, her tone sharp and exasperated. The background noise on her end of the line was chaotic. I could hear the rustling of heavy fabric, the snapping of suitcase zippers, and my father barking orders in the distance about finding his expensive sunglasses. Mom, I gasped, my voice weak and raspy. Mom, I need your help. I was in an accident. A car hit me. I am in the emergency room at Memorial Hospital. There was a pause on the line, but it was not the stunned silence of a mother realizing her child was badly hurt. It was the silence of someone deeply inconvenienced. I could hear her cover the receiver and mutter something to my father before coming back on the line. Well, are you okay? Are you paralyzed or something? She asked, her voice entirely devoid of maternal warmth. I have a severe concussion and my collarbone is fractured. I explained, fighting to keep the rising panic out of my voice. The doctors have me immobilized on a bed. I cannot leave. But Mom, Leo is at home with the teenage sitter. She has to leave in 15 minutes. I need you and Dad to drive over to my house right now and pick him up, please. The heavy sigh returned, this time louder and more theatrical. Chelsea, I really do not have time for your drama today, Barbara said, her words hitting me like physical blows. The background noise on her end seemed to amplify. Are you seriously asking me to drop everything right now? You know perfectly well what today is. Your sister Ashley booked us a luxury Caribbean cruise to celebrate her new business venture. Our private car is arriving in 10 minutes, and our first-class flight leaves in exactly 3 hours. I squeezed my eyes shut, fresh tears of absolute disbelief burning behind my eyelids. Mom, my car was destroyed. I am lying in a hospital bed attached to heart monitors. This is not drama. This is a severe medical emergency. My newborn son is going to be alone. You live 15 minutes away. You have time to go get him and bring him here, or at least wait with him until I can call a professional service. Just please secure my baby. I am in too much pain to figure this out alone right now. Chelsea listened to that awful beeping in the background. It is giving me a migraine just hearing it through the phone, she complained, completely ignoring my desperate sobbing pleas. Why do you always do this? You always have to make everything about you. Your sister never has these ridiculous emergencies. She planned this beautiful vacation for us, and you are trying to ruin the mood right before we leave. Call a neighbor or a friend from your office. We are not missing our flight because you failed to plan a proper backup babysitter. And with a sharp, decisive click, my mother hung up the phone. We do not have time for your drama today, Chelsea. Barbara snapped over the chaotic background noise of a busy airport terminal. Your sister Ashley never has these emergencies. She actually planned ahead and booked us a luxury Caribbean cruise to celebrate her new lifestyle brand launch. Our private car is arriving at the gate in 10 minutes, and our first-class flight leaves in exactly 3 hours. Call a neighbor or something. The line went dead. A sharp click echoed in my ear, followed by the steady hum of a disconnected call. I lay there on the stiff hospital mattress, with my fractured collarbone throbbing in time with the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. I did not cry. I did not scream. The blinding panic that had gripped my chest just moments ago suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a chilling absolute clarity. My mother had just told me she was boarding a first-class flight for a luxury cruise while I was immobilized in a trauma ward, and my 8-week-old son Leo was about to be left completely alone. And she was doing it with my money. For 9 long years, I had sacrificed my own financial freedom. Every single month without fail, I transferred exactly $3,800 into my parents' joint checking account. It was the strict agreement we made when I got my first major promotion to logistics director. They had come to my apartment crying, claiming the bank was threatening to foreclose on my childhood home. They begged me to help them keep a roof over their heads. I gave up vacations. I drove a reliable but aging sedan. And I delayed buying my own house so my parents would not end up on the street. I subsidized their survival while they constantly bragged about Ashley and her endless string of failed startup ventures. Ashley was the influencer. Ashley was the creative genius. I was just the boring corporate workhorse who paid the bills. My unbroken left hand gripped my cracked smartphone. The cold, hard numbers crashed over me. $3,800 a month for 9 years. That was $410,400. I had given them almost $500,000 to save a house they apparently did not need to save if they could afford to drop tens of thousands of dollars on a VIP Caribbean vacation for 3. The physical pain in my shoulder faded into the background, masked by a sudden rush of pure cold adrenaline. I was done being the family ATM. I was done buying their affection and funding my sister's delusions of grandeur. With precise, deliberate movements, I opened my mobile banking application. The screen glowed against the sterile white walls of the emergency room. I navigated straight to the recurring transfers menu. There it was. The automatic payment scheduled to leave my account on the first of every month labeled Mom and Dad House Fund. I pressed my thumb against the delete button. A warning prompt popped up asking if I was sure I wanted to permanently cancel this recurring transaction. I did not hesitate. I hit confirm. The screen flashed a green checkmark indicating the transfer was successfully canceled. The relief that washed over me was intoxicating. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed. Let them try to pay for their first-class upgrades now. But I could not afford to dwell on my parents right now. My immediate priority was Leo. The teenage babysitter was leaving in less than 15 minutes, and my son needed a secure, reliable guardian. My parents had refused, but I did not need them. I had my own resources. I opened my web browser and navigated to the corporate portal for Elite Care Solutions, a premium medical staffing agency I frequently used to coordinate specialized transport for my logistics company. I knew their pediatric division offered emergency dispatch services for high-net-worth clients. I dialed their emergency priority line. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. Elite Care Solutions, this is Thomas speaking. How may I assist you today? I need an immediate emergency dispatch to my residence. I instructed, my voice steady and commanding. I require a fully bonded registered pediatric nurse for 24/7, continuous care starting in exactly 12 minutes. I have an 8-week-old infant at home, and I have been involved in a major traffic collision. The dispatcher did not miss a beat. Understood, ma'am. Can I have your account access code? I provided my corporate ID and personal billing information. I bypassed my standard checking account and routed the charges directly to my corporate emergency fund, a high-yield account I had built specifically for catastrophic events. The cost was astronomical, but it was a fraction of what I had been throwing away on my parents' fake mortgage every month. We have a pediatric specialist named Carmen, currently stationed 5 minutes from your zip code, Thomas informed me after a brief pause. She is bonded, heavily vetted, and equipped for emergency infant care. I am routing her to your address immediately. She will arrive before your current sitter departs. I will send you her credentials and GPS tracking link right now. Thank you, Thomas, I replied. Have her call my cell phone the second she steps inside the house. I hung up the phone and let out a long, shaky breath. The crushing weight on my chest finally began to lift. Leo was safe. He was going to be in the hands of a trained medical professional, not a resentful grandmother who viewed him as an inconvenience. I had handled the crisis entirely on my own without begging the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text message from the agency. It was a photo of the nurse along with her license verification. 2 minutes after that, my phone rang. Miss Chelsea, the warm, steady voice of the nurse came through the speaker. I am inside your home. The babysitter has been relieved and I am holding Leo right now. He is perfectly fine and currently sleeping. I have secured the premises and I am reviewing his feeding schedule. Tears of genuine relief finally pricked the corners of my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you so much. I will be in the hospital for a few days. Please spare no expense for anything he needs. You just focus on healing, the nurse assured me. We have everything under control here. I dropped my phone back onto the tray table and let my head sink into the thin hospital pillow. My heart rate began to slow, returning to a normal rhythm. I had survived the crash. I had secured my son. I had cut off the parasites masquerading as my parents. For the first time in 9 years, I felt entirely in control of my own life. I closed my eyes, preparing to finally call for a doctor and ask for pain medication. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a sharp throbbing ache in my fractured collarbone. But before I could even reach for the call button, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my bay. The thick wooden door of my hospital room swung open with such force that it smacked against the wall stopper. My eyes snapped open, expecting to see a trauma surgeon or an impatient orderly. Instead, I saw my 78-year-old grandfather Harrison standing in the doorway. How was a formidable man. Even in his late 70s, he stood tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored wool coat over a crisp button-down shirt. He had built a massive fortune in commercial real estate through sheer grit, and he carried an aura of absolute authority wherever he went. But right now, he did not look like the calm, collected patriarch I knew. He looked absolutely livid. His jaw was clenched tight, and his eyes were dark with a fury I had rarely seen him display. In his right hand, he gripped a thick, tightly packed manila envelope so hard his knuckles were white. "Grandpa," I breathed, wincing as I tried to shift my weight. "How did you know I was here?" He marched into the room, ignoring the chairs and standing directly beside my bed. "The police called my emergency line when they could not reach your parents," he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I drove straight here from the estate. I called your mother from the car to tell her you were in a severe accident. Do you know what she told me?" "She told me she was getting on a cruise ship," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. Harrison's eyes narrowed, and he slammed the heavy manila envelope down onto my rolling tray table. The loud smack echoed in the quiet room. "She told me she could not be bothered because Ashley needed a vacation." He corrected, his tone dripping with disgust. "She actually complained that your near-fatal car crash was ruining their first-class boarding experience." I stared at the thick envelope on the table. "What is that?" "That is the reason I came straight to this hospital instead of waiting for visiting hours," my grandfather said. He leaned over the bed, placing his hands firmly on the metal rails. "I heard what they did to you today, Chelsea. But there is something you need to know about what they have been doing to you for the last decade. You need to know exactly where your hard-earned money has actually been going for the last 9 years." Grandpa Harrison pulled a heavy plastic chair to the side of my bed. The metal legs scraped harshly against the linoleum floor. He sat down heavily, resting his forearms on his knees, and let out a breath that sounded more like a growl. He did not ask how my shoulder felt. He did not offer empty platitudes about how everything happens for a reason. He knew me better than that. He knew I needed facts. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at the manila envelope resting on my lap. "Open it," he commanded. My good hand was trembling, but I managed to slip my fingers under the flap and pull out a stack of documents. They were bank statements, wire transfer logs, and property deeds. The print blurred slightly before my eyes, partly from the concussion, but mostly from the sheer volume of paperwork. "10 years ago," Grandpa Harrison began, his voice cutting through the sterile silence of the hospital room, "your father came to my office. He told me he made some bad investments. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. He said the bank was going to foreclose on the house. Your mother was in hysterics, crying about the public humiliation of losing their home in that neighborhood." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my fractured ribs. "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They told me the exact same story a year later when I got my promotion. That is why I started sending them $3,800 every month. I have been paying their mortgage to keep them afloat." Grandpa Harrison's face darkened, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "Chelsea, there is no mortgage." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I blinked, trying to process the impossible statement. "What do you mean there is no mortgage? I have been paying it. I send the transfer on the first of every single month. Look at the first document," he instructed, his tone unyielding. I pulled the top paper from the stack. It was a deed of reconveyance for my parents' house, stamped and notarized. The date of execution was exactly 10 years ago. It showed the property was owned free and clear. "I paid off their mortgage," Grandpa Harrison stated flatly. "I wrote a check for the entire remaining balance to keep my daughter from being thrown out on the street. They have not owed a single cent to any bank for a decade." The room seemed to tilt sharply on its axis. A cold, nauseating wave washed over me. If there was no mortgage, Then what was my $3,800 paying for? What was the $410,400 I had sacrificed over the last 9 years actually funding? I thought of the vacations I had skipped, the reliable but aging car I drove, the nights I stayed up calculating budgets to ensure I could cover my own rent while keeping my parents from facing homelessness. It was all a lie. A massive, calculated, parasitic lie. Grandpa Harrison reached over and flipped to the next page in the stack. It was a ledger of bank transfers. These documents were acquired legally by my estate manager during a routine audit of family trusts, he explained. Your parents have a joint checking account where your monthly transfers are deposited, but the money does not stay there. My eyes scanned the highlighted columns on the ledger. On the first of every month, an incoming transfer of $3,800 arrived from my account. On the second of every month, an outgoing transfer of exactly $3,800 left their account. The destination account was registered to Ashley Wilson. My breath hitched. The air was suddenly too thin to breathe. My 31-year-old sister, the golden child, the creative visionary who was too delicate for a traditional 9-to-5 job. The influencer who constantly posted photos of expensive brunches, designer handbags, and spontaneous weekend getaways. They have been funneling your money directly to Ashley. Grandpa Harrison said, the disgust evident in every syllable. Every single cent you sacrificed to save their home went straight into your sister's checking account to fund her lifestyle. I stared at the pages, my mind racing through years of memories, reframing every family interaction through this sickening new lens. I remembered Ashley launching a custom candle business 3 years ago. She had bragged about securing private funding to rent a storefront downtown. The business folded in 6 months, but she never seemed stressed about the financial loss. I remembered her sudden decision to become a luxury travel blogger, jetting off to Paris and Milan, while I worked 60-hour weeks overseeing supply chains. When I asked my parents how she afforded it, they claimed she had brilliant sponsors. I was the sponsor. I was the private funding. My hard-earned logistics salary was the invisible engine powering my sister's delusions of grandeur. It gets worse, Grandpa Harrison said, flipping to another page. It was a receipt from a high-end travel agency. Your mother told you she was going on a Caribbean cruise today. Did she mention what suite they booked? I shook my head, unable to speak around the massive lump forming in my throat. They booked the penthouse owner's suite, he revealed, pointing to the total cost at the bottom of the invoice. $25,000. Ashley organized the trip, but she used the credit card linked to the account where your monthly transfers go. You literally paid for the vacation they are taking right now. The vacation they deemed more important than picking up your newborn son while you lay bleeding in a hospital. The betrayal was absolute. It was not just financial theft, it was emotional violence. My parents had looked me in the eye for 9 years, accepted my money with manufactured gratitude, and immediately handed it to the daughter they preferred. They watched me work myself to the bone. They watched me stress over my own financial security. They watched me become a mother and struggle to balance the costs of childcare, all while they secretly laughed behind my back and funded Ashley's endless playtime. And today, when I needed them for a true matter of life and death, they had abandoned me to go enjoy a luxury cruise that I had unknowingly purchased for them. The shock began to recede, leaving behind a profound, terrifying emptiness. But that emptiness did not last long. It was quickly filled with a heat so intense I could feel it radiating from my skin. The tears that had threatened to fall completely dried up. I did not want to cry. I wanted to burn their perfectly constructed world to the ground. I looked up from the documents and met my grandfather's gaze. The fierce, uncompromising anger I saw in his eyes perfectly mirrored the calculated rage building in my own chest. He was a man who built an empire on respect, hard work, and loyalty. My parents had violated every single one of his principles, just as they had violated mine. Chelsea, Grandpa Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, deadly quiet and incredibly sharp. I tolerated your mother's superficial vanity for decades. I tolerated your father's business incompetence because he was family. But I will not tolerate parasites draining the life out of the only grandchild who actually shares my work ethic. This stops today. I already canceled the transfer, I stated, my voice surprisingly steady. They will not get another dime from me. That is just the beginning, he replied, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. Cutting off the money stops the bleeding. Now we have to address the infection. They have grown arrogant, Chelsea. They believe they are untouchable because they have manipulated us for so long. They think they can abandon you in a trauma center and simply return in 2 weeks to their comfortable, subsidized lives without consequences. He pointed to the manila envelope. There are laws against what they have done, financial exploitation under false pretenses. But beyond the legal repercussions, there is the family estate, my estate. I have spent the last month quietly auditing everything, preparing to restructure my trusts. What I found in these bank statements confirmed every suspicion I had about their moral bankruptcy. I adjusted my posture, ignoring the shooting pain in my collarbone. The physical agony was entirely eclipsed by the burning desire for justice. What do we do? I asked. A grim, predatory smile touched the corners of Grandpa Harrison's mouth. It was the smile of a predator circling its prey. We let them enjoy the first few days of their luxury vacation. We let them sail out into international waters where they have limited communication and no control over what happens on land. And while they are sipping expensive champagne on a ship you paid for, we dismantle their entire reality. He pulled a pen from his breast pocket and tapped it against the tray table. I am freezing all secondary collateral accounts attached to their names. I am contacting my estate lawyers to begin the formal process of disinheritance. But more importantly, we are going to look into the rest of Ashley's financial history. If they have been lying about this mortgage for 10 years, I guarantee you there are other bodies buried in the backyard. I nodded, my mind sharp and focused. I want a forensic accountant, I said. I want every single financial interaction I have ever had with them audited. If there is a single forged signature, a single fraudulent credit inquiry, I want it documented. Done, he agreed instantly. I have the best firm in the city on retainer. They will start tomorrow morning. We sat in the hospital room, a silent pact forming between us. The grandfather who refused to see his legacy squandered, and the granddaughter who refused to be a victim any longer. My parents and my sister thought they had discarded a burden today. They had no idea they had just created their worst nightmare. We were going to destroy the toxic dynamic of this family permanently, and we were going to do it with surgical precision. Grandpa Harrison pulled a sleek silver smartphone from his coat pocket. He did not hesitate. He dialed a number from memory and put it on speaker, resting it on the metal tray table next to the damning bank statements. The line picked up on the first ring. It was Arthur Penhaligon, the ruthless senior partner at the most feared estate law firm in Boston. Harrison gave his orders with the cold detachment of a general directing an airstrike. He instructed Arthur to immediately freeze all secondary collateral accounts attached to David and Barbara Wilson. He ordered the complete dissolution of the familial trust funds that named them or Ashley as beneficiaries. He demanded that every single liquid asset tied to their names through his estate be locked down, pending a full forensic audit. Arthur did not ask questions. He simply promised that the injunctions would be filed before the courts closed at 5 o'clock. I lay there, the steady beep of my heart monitor providing a surreal soundtrack to the systematic dismantling of my parents' financial world. The physical agony in my fractured collarbone was intense, a sharp burning sensation that flared with every shallow breath I took. My head pounded from the concussion, making the bright hospital lights swim in my vision. Yet beneath the severe physical trauma, a profound sense of liberation was taking root. For the first time in my adult life, I was not shrinking myself to fit into the background. I was fighting back. Just as Harrison ended the call with his attorney, the cracked screen of my smartphone lit up. The device began to vibrate violently against the hard plastic of the tray table. The caller ID displayed an international number. I stared at it, my heart skipping a beat. It was the cruise line terminal in Miami. They were boarding. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the phone lit up again. Then a third time. The vibration rattled the table, a frantic mechanical buzzing that mirrored the rising panic I knew was exploding on the other end of the line. Harrison reached over and slid the phone closer to my uninjured hand. "Answer it," he instructed, his voice low and firm. Let them dig their own grave. Do not raise your voice. Do not give them the satisfaction of your anger. Let your silence be the loudest thing they hear. I swiped the green button with a trembling thumb and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. I just listened. Chelsea! Barbara's voice hissed through the speaker. It was not a greeting. It was a frantic, venomous demand. My mother was speaking in a harsh, strained whisper, clearly trying to keep her voice down in a crowded public space. I could hear the chaotic ambiance of the luxury cruise terminal in the background. Steel drums played a cheerful tropical melody, completely at odds with the pure panic radiating from Barbara. What is going on with the bank account? Barbara demanded, her breath hitching. We are standing at the VIP concierge desk in the terminal. Ashley wanted to upgrade our suite to the absolute top tier for the voyage. She promised the concierge a massive tip, but my platinum card just declined. The machine beeped and the clerk actually looked at me like I was a common criminal. I handed him your father's card, and that one declined too. You need to call the bank and fix this glitch right now. Do you hear me? Fix it immediately. Ashley is standing right here and she is absolutely mortified. We look like fools in front of the entire first-class boarding line. I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity of the complaint washed over me, chilling me to the bone. My mother was not calling to ask if I had survived the horrific car crash. She was not calling to check if her 8-week-old grandson was safe. She was calling because her stolen funds had dried up at the VIP desk. There is no bank glitch, Mom, I replied. My voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of any warmth or familial affection. The account is empty because I permanently canceled the transfer. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The tropical music in the background seemed to mock the sudden heavy silence. What are you talking about? Barbara finally sputtered, her whisper breaking into a shrill shriek. You cannot cancel the transfer. That is our mortgage money. You promised to pay that to save our home. You are legally obligated to help us. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Grandpa Harrison. He nodded slowly, his face carved from stone. I know exactly what that money pays for, I stated smoothly. Grandpa Harrison is sitting right next to my hospital bed. He brought the deed of reconveyance for your house. He also brought the bank ledgers showing every single monthly payment I sent you being directly routed into Ashley's personal checking account. I know you do not have a mortgage. I know I have been funding Ashley's fake influencer lifestyle for 9 years. I know I paid for the cruise ticket you are holding in your hand right now. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment I wondered if the call had dropped, but then I heard my father David yelling aggressively in the background, threatening to sue the cruise line for embarrassing his family. Barbara was breathing heavily into the receiver, cornered and exposed. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing an ounce of shame or remorse for stealing nearly $500,000 from her own daughter, Barbara went on the offensive. The toxic narcissistic defense mechanism kicked into high gear. You selfish, ungrateful brat! Barbara erupted, no longer caring who heard her in the terminal. You have always been jealous of your sister. You have always hated that she is creative and beautiful and living a life you could never dream of. You are a bitter single mother who is just trying to ruin Ashley's gift out of pure spite. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us that money. You call the bank right now and authorize the release of those funds, or I swear to God, Chelsea, we will never speak to you again. You will be dead to this family. I felt a strange, weightless sensation in my chest. The threat of being disowned, the threat that had kept me in line for decades, suddenly held absolutely no power over me. It was not a threat at all. It was a promise of freedom. I was in a catastrophic car crash today, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a glacial whisper. My car is totaled. I have fractured bones and a brain injury. I had to use my emergency corporate funds to hire a 24/7 pediatric care nurse because you abandoned your grandson to go on a vacation I paid for. I am not ruining Ashley's gift. I am paying for my own medical survival. You are dead to me. Have a terrible cruise. I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the red end call button. I immediately opened my settings, navigated to my blocked contacts list, and added both my mother and my father. I then added Ashley for good measure. I placed the phone face down on the tray table. The silence in the hospital room felt sacred. The oppressive, suffocating weight of my parents' expectations and demands was gone. I had drawn the line in the sand, And I had done it without screaming, without crying, and without backing down. Grandpa Harrison let out a low whistle of genuine respect. He leaned back in his plastic chair looking at me with a mixture of immense pride and deep sorrow. He knew the pain of severing family ties, but he also knew the necessity of excising a rot before it destroyed everything else. "You handled that perfectly," Harrison said gently. "You gave them nothing to use against you. They are standing in that terminal right now, completely cut off from your money, and soon to be cut off from mine. They will have to downgrade to whatever cabin they can afford with their actual income, which I suspect is very little." I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding for 9 years. "It hurts," I admitted, staring at the stark white ceiling. "It hurts to know they truly do not care if I live or die as long as the check clears." Harrison stood up and placed a large, warm hand over my uninjured arm. "They are broken people, Chelsea. They value the appearance of wealth over the substance of character. But you are not broken. You survived them. You built a career, you brought a beautiful boy into this world, and you did it all while carrying their dead weight. Imagine how far you will go now that you are free of them." I managed a small pained smile. The throbbing in my head was intensifying, and the nurses would likely be in soon to administer a stronger dose of pain medication. I wanted to rest. I wanted to close my eyes and picture Leo safe at home with a professional nurse. I wanted to imagine a future where my phone did not ring with demands for cash. But Harrison was not finished. The fierce protective anger had not left his eyes. He slowly removed his hand from my arm and reached back toward the thick manila envelope resting on the tray table. "I told you cutting off the monthly transfer was just the beginning to stopping the bleeding," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "I told you we were going to look into the rest of their financial history." I frowned, trying to focus through the pain medication haze. "Yes. You said you were going to hire a forensic accountant tomorrow morning." "I am," Harrison confirmed. "But when my estate manager was pulling the bank ledgers to prove they were stealing your money, he noticed a massive discrepancy, something that triggered an automatic flag in the estate security monitoring software. He ran a preliminary quiet credit check on your social security number just to ensure they had not attached your name to the house they claimed to be saving." I felt my stomach drop. My heart monitor spiked, the beeping accelerating in the quiet room. "What did he find? Did they take out a second mortgage in my name?" Harrison pulled a single crisp sheet of paper from the very bottom of the manila envelope. He did not hand it to me. He held it up so I could read the bold black text printed across the top. It was an automated alert from a major national credit bureau. "They did not take out a mortgage," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He pointed a thick finger at a highlighted section in the middle of the page. "Look at this date, Chelsea. Look at the balance." I squinted, forcing my concussed brain to process the numbers. The date was exactly 2 years ago. The account type was listed as a small business commercial loan. The original principal amount was $150,000. The current status was listed in bright red letters: default, actively in collections. "I do not understand," I stammered, panic rising in my throat. "I never took out a commercial loan. I work for a logistics company. I do not own a small business." Harrison lowered the paper, his eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. "No, you do not. But 2 years ago, your sister Ashley launched that luxury candle storefront. She needed private funding. Your parents used your monthly transfers to pay the minimum interest, keeping the account just current enough to avoid immediate legal action. But the principal never went down, and the business failed. They stole your money, Chelsea. But worse than that, they stole your identity. You are on the hook for $150,000, and the bank is preparing to sue." The sterile smell of the hospital room was entirely replaced by the sharp metallic tang of pure fury. I stared at the credit alert in my grandfather's hand, the red letters screaming default burning themselves into my retinas. The initial shock evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating drive that belonged to a woman who managed multinational supply chains for a living. My family had treated my life like a disposable asset. They had used my credit, my hard work, and my blind loyalty to fund a fantasy. Now I was going to turn that fantasy into a nightmare. Grandpa Harrison did not waste a single second. Within an hour, he had arranged a private medical transport to discharge me directly to my home. The ride back to my quiet suburban house was a blur of throbbing shoulder pain and rapidly forming strategies. When we arrived, the contrast to the chaos of my family could not have been more striking. My house was immaculate. Carmen, the elite pediatric nurse I had dispatched, was rocking Leo in the sunlit living room, humming a soft lullaby. My son was safe-fed and completely unaware of the war that had just been declared in his name. I kissed his warm, soft forehead, breathing in the scent of baby lotion, and felt my resolve harden into titanium. I settled onto my living room sofa, my arm secured in a fresh sling, while Harrison immediately transformed my dining room table into a command center. He opened his laptop and conferenced in Arthur, his lead estate attorney. The first order of business was to get an exact status update on the cruise ship situation. Arthur had aggressively frozen every single secondary account trust line and emergency credit card tied to my parents. The resulting financial shockwave had hit them the moment they stepped foot on the luxury liner. Arthur's voice crackled through the laptop speakers, sounding dangerously amused. "The cruise line's financial compliance office just contacted me," Arthur reported. "Apparently, Barbara attempted to process a $25,000 charge for the penthouse owner's suite using 5 different credit cards. Every single one was declined. When she tried to use the emergency reserve account with your name on it, Mr. Harrison, the bank flagged it for suspected fraud due to our lockdown." Harrison leaned forward, a grim smile playing on his lips. "What did the cruise director do?" "They enforced standard maritime hospitality protocol," Arthur replied. "Since the ship was at full capacity, and they could not provide a valid form of payment for the luxury tier, the captain ordered ship security to escort them out of the VIP concourse. They were given a choice to disembark immediately or accept the only accommodation available that matched the meager funds left on David's personal debit card." I looked at my grandfather, raising an eyebrow. "And what accommodation was that?" Arthur cleared his throat, suppressing a laugh. "They are currently occupying a Class Z interior maintenance cabin. It is located on the lowest passenger deck directly adjacent to the ship's engine room and the industrial laundry facility. It is 120 square feet. There are no windows. There is no balcony. It features 2 fold-down bunk beds and a single cot. They are trapped in a metal closet for the next 14 days. The image of my status, obsessed mother, my arrogant father, and my completely spoiled sister, crammed into a windowless, vibrating metal box next to a boiler room, was almost too perfect. For years, Barbara had looked down her nose at anyone who did not fly first class. Ashley had built her entire fake online persona around champagne flutes and ocean views. Now they were going to spend 2 weeks listening to industrial washing machines. I grabbed my iPad with my good hand and pulled up Ashley's Instagram profile. Just yesterday, she had been posting continuous video updates from the airport terminal, bragging to her 20,000 purchased followers about her upcoming penthouse suite and the private butler service she was about to enjoy. Today, the page was a ghost town. The terminal videos had been hastily deleted. There were no pictures of tropical drinks. There were no tour updates. Her usually obnoxious, loud social media presence had gone completely, utterly silent. The sheer humiliation of being escorted by security past the other boarding passengers must have broken her. The friction inside that tiny, windowless room was undoubtedly catastrophic. I could easily picture them turning on each other, screaming over the roar of the ship's engines, with no one else to blame but themselves. But the petty satisfaction of their ruined vacation was not enough. It was barely a down payment on the justice I was owed. I pushed the iPad aside and looked at Harrison. "The cruise is a distraction," I stated, shifting my focus back to the credit alert resting on the table. "We need to dissect this loan. I need to know exactly how Ashley managed to borrow $150,000 in my name, and I need to know how complicit my parents were in keeping it hidden." Harrison nodded, his expression turning deadly serious. He made one more phone call. Less than an hour later, Marcus Vance arrived at my front door. Marcus was the premier forensic accountant for Harrison's firm. He was a man who spoke exclusively in spreadsheets, routing numbers and tax codes. He did not offer me pity for my injuries. He simply opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of authorization forms, and asked me to sign them so he could gain federal clearance to audit my entire financial history. I spent the next 2 days recovering on my sofa, managing the pain in my collarbone, with strict medication schedules, while Carmen cared for Leo. The house was quiet, save for the relentless aggressive tapping of Marcus's keyboard in the dining room. He worked day and night tracing digital footprints, pulling archived tax returns, and cross-referencing the routing numbers from my parents' joint checking account. He was building a comprehensive map of a decade-long betrayal. On the evening of the third day, Marcus finally pushed his chair back from the dining table. He removed his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He motioned for Harrison and me to join him. I carefully walked over to the table and sat down, my heart pounding a steady nervous rhythm against my ribs. I have mapped the entire money flow. Marcus began turning his laptop screen toward us. It is worse than we initially projected. The $3,800 you sent them every month was indeed routed directly to Ashley. However, that was just their baseline theft. The commercial loan is where this crosses a very dangerous legal threshold. He tapped a key, bringing up a scanned copy of a loan application. 2 years ago, Ashley applied for a small business administration loan through a regional bank. She used her own business name, Ashley Aesthetics LLC. But she used your social security number, your employment history, and your credit profile as the sole personal guarantor for the debt. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. How did she get my employment history? I have never shared my W-2 forms or my logistics contract details with her. She did not need you to share them, Marcus said grimly, because your parents supplied them. He pulled up a digital access log provided by the bank. When you went away to college and later when you moved to your first apartment, you left a box of early financial documents in your childhood bedroom. Furthermore, your parents still received some of your secondary tax mail at their address. Your father, David, actively logged into an old dormant tax portal using your maiden name security questions. He downloaded your past 3 years of federal tax returns and emailed them directly to Ashley's business account. We have the digital timestamp proving the IP address originated from their Beacon Hill home router. The betrayal hit me so hard I felt physically nauseous. My father, the man who had constantly told me I needed to work harder, who had lectured me on financial responsibility, while I paid his fake mortgage, had actively participated in stealing my identity. He had handed my private tax documents to my sister so she could defraud a bank. Because they used your stellar credit. The bank approved the $150,000 instantly. Marcus continued, his voice devoid of emotion. Ashley blew through the entire principal in 8 months. She spent it on luxury inventory that never sold, commercial rent for a storefront she never opened, and personal expenses. When the loan went into repayment, they panicked. The monthly minimum interest was exactly $3,200. I gasped, the final puzzle piece snapping into place with sickening clarity. That is why they asked for an increase. Exactly, Harrison growled from beside me. 2 years ago, Barbara told you property taxes had gone up. She begged you to increase your monthly transfer from $600 to $3,800. I felt completely numb. I had been paying the interest on the fraudulent loan they took out in my name. I had been keeping the bank from alerting me to the fraud by paying the very debt that was destroying my financial future. Marcus leaned forward, folding his hands together. Chelsea, what they have done is not just a breach of family trust. It is not a civil dispute over a borrowed sum. Ashley forged your digital signature on federal loan documents. Your parents facilitated the theft by intercepting and distributing your federal tax returns across state lines. They used wire transfers to move the stolen funds. He looked me dead in the eye, delivering the final crushing blow. The bank they defrauded is FDIC insured. The documents they forged are tied to the Small Business Administration, which is a federal agency. This has escalated far beyond local police jurisdiction. What we are looking at is aggravated identity theft, multiple counts of wire fraud, and federal bank fraud. The silence in my dining room was deafening. The scope of their crimes was massive. They had not just stolen my money, they had recklessly gambled with my freedom. If I had not canceled that transfer, If the bank had come after me for the defaulted principal, I could have faced financial ruin or worse. My parents had wrapped a federal noose around my neck just to let Ashley play pretend. I looked at Marcus, then at Grandpa Harrison. The fear was entirely gone. I did not care that they were currently trapped in a miserable windowless cabin in the middle of the ocean. I did not care that they were my blood. They had chosen to treat me like collateral damage. Draft the final report, Marcus, I instructed, my voice echoing with a dark, absolute certainty. Compile every single IP address, every forged signature, and every wire transfer log. Put it in a binder. Grandpa Harrison raised his eyebrows. And what are you going to do with the binder, Chelsea? I looked out the window toward the street, imagining the day their miserable cruise would finally end. I am going to call the Financial Crimes Division of the federal authorities, I said. We are taking this to the FBI. I am going to call the Financial Crimes Division of the federal authorities, I said. We are taking this to the FBI. Marcus did not blink. He simply nodded and reached for the thick stack of papers he had just printed. He began organizing them into a pristine black binder. Every forged signature, every intercepted tax return, and every wire transfer log was placed into clear plastic sleeves. It was a perfectly documented roadmap of federal offenses. Grandpa Harrison pulled his phone back out. He did not dial the general tip line. A man with his resources did not wait on hold. He called a direct contact he had cultivated over decades of corporate dealings, a senior agent in the white-collar crimes division at the Boston field office. Harrison spoke in low-clipped sentences, outlining the sheer brazenness of the $150,000 Small Business Administration loan fraud. The mention of a federally backed SBA loan changed the entire trajectory of the conversation. This was no longer just a family dispute over borrowed money. It was the misappropriation of government-insured funds. Harrison ended the call and looked at me. Special Agent Miller is clearing his schedule. He will be at your house tomorrow morning at 9. I sank back into the pillows on my sofa, the pain in my collarbone pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The adrenaline that had carried me through the initial shock was beginning to fade, leaving behind a profound, terrifying clarity. I was about to initiate a sequence of events that would end with my parents and my sister facing federal indictments. I looked across the room to where Carmen was gently rocking Leo to sleep. My son looked so peaceful, so entirely dependent on me to protect him from the world. My parents had been willing to sacrifice my financial security and by extension Leo's future just to fund Ashley's vanity. I felt no guilt for what I was about to do. I only felt a cold, impenetrable resolve. The next morning, before the FBI agent even arrived, my phone vibrated against the coffee table. I had blocked their personal numbers, but this call was coming from an unknown international line. I knew exactly who it was. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, I opened the audio file and pressed play, making sure the volume was loud enough for Harrison and Marcus to hear. It was my father. David's voice was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, condescending tone he usually weaponized against me was entirely gone. He sounded breathless, ragged, and cornered. "Chelsea, you have to fix this," David begged, his voice barely audible over a loud, mechanical humming noise in the background. It sounded like he was standing inside a factory. "You have to call the bank. Arthur Penhaligon has frozen everything. The cruise line canceled our suite. They marched us down to the absolute bottom deck of the ship. We are in a maintenance overflow cabin. There are no windows. It smells like diesel fuel. The engine vibration is shaking the fillings out of my teeth." In the background of the voicemail, the audio peaked with the sound of breaking plastic. Then came Ashley's voice, shrill and hysterical. She was screaming at Barbara. "You told me the credit card was fine." Ashley shrieked, her voice echoing in what was clearly a very small confined space. "I cannot post anything. I cannot go to the VIP deck. I had to eat breakfast at the public buffet. The Wi-Fi package declined. I have no signal down here in this dungeon. You ruined my life." Then came Barbara's voice, sobbing uncontrollably, blaming David for not handling the estate lawyers, blaming Ashley for the expensive suite upgrade, and screaming my name like a curse word. The toxic trio was turning on each other like starving wolves locked in a cage. David's voice came back to the receiver, desperate and furious. "You are humiliating us, Chelsea. Ashley is having a mental breakdown. We have no cash for gratuities, no money for excursions. We are trapped in this vibrating closet for 14 days. Unlock the accounts immediately, or I will never forgive you." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I deleted the message and placed the phone back on the table. They were trapped in a floating metal box surrounded by the luxury they could no longer afford, forced to confront the reality of their own incompetence. It was a poetic, brutal justice, but it was not enough. Exactly at 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Special Agent Miller was a tall, sharp-eyed man who carried himself with absolute authority. He sat at my dining room table across from Marcus and spent 2 hours reviewing the black binder. He scrutinized the IP address logs showing David downloading my tax returns. He reviewed the fraudulent signatures on the commercial loan applications. He traced the monthly minimum interest payments flowing from my stolen funds directly to the defrauded bank. When he finally closed the binder, his expression was incredibly grave. "Miss Wilson," Agent Miller said, folding his hands on top of the black folder. "I have seen family fraud before, but the coordination here is staggering. Your sister committed aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. Your parents facilitated it across state lines and actively conspired to conceal it by misappropriating your monthly transfers. Because this involves an SBA loan, they have defrauded the federal government." He looked at me intently. "If I take this binder back to my office, an official federal investigation begins immediately. I need to know if you are prepared to testify against your parents and your sister in a court of law. There is no backing out once the gears start turning. They will face mandatory minimum prison sentences." I did not look away. I did not blink. "I am prepared to do whatever is necessary," I stated. They did not care if I lost my home. They did not care if I ended up bankrupt. They did not even care if I died in that car crash. "Do your job, Agent Miller." Miller nodded once, a brief gesture of professional respect. He packed the binder into his briefcase, because the digital devices used to commit these crimes are currently sitting unguarded in their Beacon Hill residence. "We need to secure them before your parents return from their cruise and attempt to destroy the evidence," he explained. "I am going to fast-track a search and seizure warrant for their property. We will move quickly." For the next 4 days, my house transformed into a fortress of healing and strategy. My collarbone was slowly knitting back together, the sharp pain dulling to a deep, manageable ache. I spent my days holding Leo, watching him sleep, and feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. The financial umbilical cord that had drained my accounts for nearly a decade was finally severed. I had contacted my own bank, filed the necessary fraud affidavits regarding the loan, and officially flagged my Social Security number. On Thursday afternoon, Harrison received a call from Arthur Penhaligon. Harrison listened for a few moments, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his stern face. He hung up the phone and looked at me. "The trap just snapped shut," Harrison announced. "Agent Miller secured the warrant. 2 hours ago, a team of federal agents arrived at your parents' Beacon Hill house. They breached the front door. They seized David's desktop computer, Ashley's abandoned laptops, and 6 boxes of physical financial records from the home office." I felt a rush of adrenaline. "Did anyone see them?" Harrison chuckled darkly. "Arthur had a private investigator parked down the street just to monitor the situation. The entire neighborhood saw it. Federal agents in windbreakers carrying evidence boxes out the front door. The rumor mill in that exclusive neighborhood is already churning. Barbara's pristine, meticulously curated social reputation is entirely dead. She is going to come home to a raided house and a neighborhood that knows she is a criminal." I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall. The luxury cruise they had boarded so arrogantly was scheduled to dock back in Miami in exactly 3 days. They had spent the last week and a half trapped in a windowless maintenance cabin eating free buffet food, completely cut off from the wealthy lifestyle they had stolen from me. They had no idea that their nightmare was just beginning. I called Agent Miller's direct line to confirm the raid. He answered promptly, his tone all business. "We secured the devices, Miss Wilson," he reported. "Our cyber division is already extracting the hard drives. We have found the original PDF files of your tax returns on your father's desktop, along with draft copies of the forged loan applications. We have everything we need for a grand jury indictment." What happens when their ship docks on Sunday? I asked, my voice steady and cold. Agent Miller paused for a moment, and I could hear the rustle of paperwork in the background. Because they are a flight risk, with significant alleged fraudulent debt, and because they are re-entering the country through a maritime port, we are not taking any chances. I have already coordinated with the United States Marshals Service and Port Authority Police in Miami. He delivered the final devastating detail with absolute precision. When that ship clears customs, your parents and your sister will not be walking out to the taxi stand. Federal agents will be waiting for them at the disembarkation terminal. They are going to be arrested the moment they step off the gangway. The morning sun was streaming through the bay windows of my living room when the violent pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was a frantic, aggressive hammering against the heavy oak of my front door, accompanied by the muffled, unmistakable sound of my father shouting my name. I sat perfectly still on the sofa. My injured shoulder throbbed with a dull ache, but the sharp, blinding pain from the day of the accident had subsided into a manageable rhythm. Carmen, who had just put Leo down for his morning nap in the nursery, stepped out into the hallway. She looked toward the vibrating front door, then turned to me, her professional demeanor completely unfazed by the commotion. "Do you want me to call the police?" Carmen asked, her voice calm and steady. "Not yet," I replied slowly, pushing myself up from the cushions. "I will handle this. Stay with Leo. Do not let them anywhere near his room." I walked down the hallway, the hardwood floor cool beneath my bare feet. The pounding escalated. Barbara's voice joined David's, a shrill crescendo of entitlement that vibrated through the glass panes. I reached out with my uninjured hand, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. David, Barbara, and Ashley practically fell into the foyer. The visual contrast between the fantasy they projected online and the reality standing in my entryway was staggering. They did not look like the elite jet-setting family they pretended to be. They looked absolutely unhinged. Barbara's usually immaculate hair was frizzy and unkempt. David's face was a blotchy, sunburned red, and his expensive polo shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat. Ashley dragged a massive scuffed suitcase behind her, her oversized designer sunglasses failing to hide the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you?" David roared, stepping directly into my personal space. His face contorted with a rage I had spent my entire childhood trying to avoid. "We had to abandon the ship in Nassau. Do you have any idea the humiliation we just endured? We were escorted down the gangway by maritime security in front of 3,000 people. My credit cards are locked. The joint accounts are frozen. The bank told me there is a complete hold on all our assets." He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You are going to pick up your phone, you are going to call your bank, and you are going to reinstate our monthly transfer immediately. Then you are going to wire me $20,000 to cover the emergency budget flights we had to take to get back here." "You have completely lost your mind, Chelsea." I did not flinch. I did not step back. For 34 years, the sheer volume of my father's voice would have sent me shrinking into myself, desperate to apologize, desperate to fix whatever I had supposedly broken to restore the peace. But the woman who used to cower before them had died in that car crash 4 days ago. The woman standing before them now felt absolutely nothing but a cold, sterile curiosity at their audacity. "You broke into our home," Barbara shrieked, pushing past David to glare at me. "We could not even go back to Beacon Hill. The neighbors told us the front door was boarded up and there was police tape across the porch. What kind of psychotic stunt are you pulling? You are trying to destroy this family over a petty temper tantrum." I looked at my mother, taking in her frantic, wide eyes. The FBI raid had clearly rattled them, but their inherent narcissism had convinced them I was somehow to blame for a simple misunderstanding. They truly believed they could barge into my house, scream me into submission, and force me to fix the catastrophic collapse of their fraudulent lives. Ashley scoffed loudly, dropping the handle of her heavy suitcase. It hit the floor with a loud thud. She crossed her arms and rolled her eyes, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. She zeroed in on the thick black medical sling securing my left arm to my chest. "Oh, please," Ashley sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "Are we supposed to feel sorry for you? You put on a sling and play the victim just because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of my life, Chelsea." You sit in an office all day doing boring, meaningless work, and you cannot stand the fact that I am actually building a brand. You canceled the cards to ruin my trip because you are bitter. You are a bitter single mother who wants everyone else to be as miserable as you are. The sheer lack of empathy was breathtaking. I had told my mother 4 days ago that I was in a severe collision. They knew I was injured. They knew I had a newborn baby in the house. Yet they had traveled over 1,000 miles, bypassed their own rated home, and come straight to my door, not to check on my survival but to demand cash and mock my injuries. David slammed his hand against the wall, demanding my attention. Listen to me very carefully, he barked, his face inches from mine. I do not care about your petty jealousy issues with your sister. Raising you was not cheap, Chelsea. We put a roof over your head, we clothed you, we fed you. That $3,800 a month you have been paying us is not a gift. It is rent. It is the absolute bare minimum compensation for the decades we spent putting up with you. You owe us that money. You owe this family your success. The gaslighting was almost artistic in its execution. He was looking me dead in the eye, aggressively attempting to rewrite the reality of his own extortion. He was trying to convince me that draining my accounts to fund his favored daughter's luxury vacations was somehow a righteous repayment for my basic childhood existence. It was the exact same manipulation tactic they had used when they lied about the bank foreclosing on their house 10 years ago. They manufactured guilt, weaponized my sense of duty, and expected me to open my checkbook to buy their conditional love. I let the silence stretch. I let their heavy, angry breathing fill the foyer. I looked at David's red face, Barbara's frantic pacing, and Ashley's petulant crossed arms. I wanted to remember this exact image. I wanted to burn the memory of their unmasked greed into my brain, so I would never ever feel a shred of guilt for what was about to happen to them. Are you finished? I asked. My voice was eerily quiet, carrying no inflection, no anger, and no fear. David blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my lack of reaction. What did you say? I asked if you were finished throwing your tantrum in my foyer, I repeated smoothly. Because if you are done shouting, you can step into the kitchen. We have business to discuss. I turned my back on them. I did not check to see if they were following. I knew they would. Their desperation for money, their absolute conviction that they could bully me into submission, made them entirely predictable. I walked into the kitchen, the bright morning light reflecting off the pristine white marble of the island counter. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of Ashley's suitcase and the angry shuffle of their footsteps as they trailed after me. They muttered under their breath, complaining about my attitude, completely blind to the trap they had just walked into. I stood behind the kitchen island. I did not offer them a seat. I did not offer them water. I treated them exactly as they were, hostile intruders demanding tribute. David marched up to the opposite side of the marble counter, slapping his palms down flat against the stone. Enough games. Chelsea. David demanded, his voice dropping into a menacing register. I want the accounts unlocked. I want the transfer reinstated. And you are going to call whoever you need to call to get the police tape off my front door. You are going to fix this right now. Barbara stepped up beside him, nodding vigorously. You have completely lost your mind, she added. Disrespecting us like this. After everything we have sacrificed for you, you need serious psychiatric help. I reached under the counter. My fingers brushed against the thick bound stack of papers I had placed there earlier this morning. Grandpa Harrison's forensic accountant, Marcus, had been exceptionally thorough. He had not just documented the money trail, he had created a master key of their deceit, a comprehensive, undeniable map of every lie, every theft, and every fraudulent signature. I pulled the top document from the stack. It was a printed spreadsheet, meticulously organized and highlighted in neon yellow. It was not the bank ledger showing the stolen mortgage payments. We were far past the mortgage lie. This was the document that elevated their greed from a family dispute to a federal crime. I did not raise my voice. I did not scowl. I simply smiled, a terrifying, razor-thin smile that caused David to finally hesitate. I placed my good hand flat against the printed spreadsheet and slid it smoothly across the polished marble island. It stopped exactly an inch from his fingertips. I am not fixing anything, David, I said softly, watching his eyes drop to the paper. Because I am not the one who broke the law. Let us talk about Ashley Aesthetics LLC, shall we? David's eyes locked onto the highlighted rows of the spreadsheet. The document Marcus had prepared was a masterpiece of forensic accounting, stripped of any confusing banking jargon, and presented with brutal, undeniable clarity. It listed 72 consecutive months of transfers. $3,800 leaving my account every 30 days under the guise of an inflated mortgage payment. The next column showed the exact routing number of my parents' joint checking account. But it was the third column that made David stop breathing. That column traced the funds leaving their account 48 hours later. $3,200 was routed directly to the Small Business Administration to cover the minimum interest payment on the fraudulent commercial loan. The remaining $600 was deposited into a personal checking account registered to Ashley Aesthetics LLC. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant red flush on his face drained away, replaced by a sickly, chalky white. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for the ground to rush up and meet him. He stared at the 9-digit routing numbers, his brain desperately trying to find a lie that could explain away certified federal bank records. There were no lies left. The numbers were absolute. Barbara noticed the terrifying shift in her husband's demeanor. She pushed her way to the edge of the island, her manicured fingers trembling as she pulled her reading glasses from her designer purse. She scanned the highlighted rows, her lips moving silently as she read the dates and the dollar amounts. When she reached the final column detailing Ashley's personal expenditures, using the stolen excess funds, she let out a sharp, strangled gasp. There were itemized timestamps matching purchases at luxury boutiques, high-end salons, and exclusive restaurants. Barbara was reading the financial autopsy of her own daughter's vanity, funded entirely by my stolen wages and their complicit deceit. Ashley did not need to read the numbers closely. She saw the heading printed in bold black ink across the top of the page. Ashley Aesthetics, LLC Fraudulent Loan Disbursements. The sheer audacity of her fake life was laid bare on my kitchen island. The panic hit her like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority, the sneering arrogance she had worn like armor just moments ago, shattered into a million jagged pieces. "That is fake!" Ashley shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. "You forged this! You hacked into my accounts! This is a complete lie!" She did not wait for a response. Acting on pure, desperate animal instinct, she threw her entire body forward. She lunged across the wide expanse of the white marble island, her hands outstretched like frantic claws. She knocked over a heavy ceramic fruit bowl, sending apples and pears tumbling across the hardwood floor. Her designer bracelets banged loudly against the stone as she reached frantically for the printed spreadsheet. She wanted to rip the paper to shreds, to physically destroy the evidence of her crimes, acting under the delusional belief that tearing a piece of paper would somehow erase the digital footprint sitting on federal servers. I did not flinch. I did not take a step back or attempt to shield the document with my good arm. I simply watched her flail across the cold stone counter, her face contorted in an ugly mask of panic. Before Ashley's manicured fingers could even brush the edge of the spreadsheet, a voice like cracking ice echoed through the kitchen. "Do not touch that document." The command was spoken with such absolute, terrifying authority that Ashley froze mid-lunge. She remained sprawled across the marble, her stomach pressed against the cold stone, her arms outstretched and trembling. From the shadows of the arched doorway, leading into the formal living room, a man stepped into the morning light. Grandpa Harrison's lead estate attorney was a man who looked like he had been carved directly from a block of granite. Arthur Penhaligon wore an immaculate charcoal gray bespoke suit that screamed old money and absolute ruthlessness. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his piercing gray eyes locked onto Ashley with the kind of detached disgust one might reserve for an infestation of pests. Arthur walked into the kitchen with slow, deliberate steps, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor. He radiated power, carrying a leather briefcase in one hand and fixing my family with a stare that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "That piece of paper is a courtesy copy provided solely for your reading comprehension." Arthur said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Tearing it up will accomplish absolutely nothing, except perhaps adding a destruction of property charge to your rapidly expanding list of legal problems. The original certified financial records are already in the possession of the authorities. David slowly lifted his heavy head, his eyes darting from me to the imposing figure standing in my kitchen. "Who are you?" David demanded. He tried to sound commanding, but his voice lacked its usual booming authority. It sounded thin, reedy, and laced with absolute dread. "I am Arthur Penhaligon, senior partner at Penhaligon Vance and Sterling," the attorney replied smoothly, stopping beside me at the kitchen island. "I represent Chelsea's grandfather, and by extension, I represent Chelsea. I am the man who froze your secondary accounts. I am the man who canceled your luxury suite. And I am the man who spent the last 4 days ensuring that your financial crimes were perfectly packaged and handed directly to law enforcement." Barbara let out a loud, pathetic sob, clutching the edge of the marble island as if her legs were about to give out. She looked at me, mascara running down her cheeks, the reality of the situation finally shattering her lifelong delusions of untouchable privilege. "Chelsea, please," Barbara begged, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "You cannot do this. You are our daughter. We are family. You cannot let this man ruin us over a simple misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, keeping my tone perfectly even and thoroughly cold. "You intercepted my federal tax returns. You handed my private financial data to your favored daughter, so she could take out a $150,000 commercial loan using my social security number. Then when she blew the principal on designer clothes and fake business expenses, you extorted $3,800 from me every single month, claiming you would lose your house just so you could pay the interest and keep the fraud hidden. There is no misunderstanding here, Barbara. There is only theft. We were going to pay you back," David suddenly shouted. He slammed his fist against the counter in a last desperate attempt to reclaim his dominance, but his hands were shaking violently. "It was a bridge loan. Ashley's business was going to take off. We were protecting her credit until she got established. You had plenty of money. You were making a massive salary. It was not hurting you. We just needed a little time." Arthur stepped forward, placing himself neatly between my kitchen island and my disgraced family. His presence was completely overwhelming. "Do not attempt to rationalize bank fraud in my presence," David Arthur warned, his tone dangerously soft. "It offends my intelligence and it is a terrible legal strategy. You actively participated in a conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. You knowingly received stolen funds. You facilitated identity theft. The fact that you felt entitled to Chelsea's hard-earned money does not change the statutory definition of your crimes." Ashley slowly pushed herself back off the marble island. She stumbled backward, her designer shoes slipping on the hardwood floor where the fruit had scattered. She looked at me, her face pale and completely devoid of its usual arrogance. She was no longer the superior sister who had mocked my medical sling just 10 minutes ago. She looked small, terrified, and completely cornered. "You are ruining my life," Ashley whimpered, wrapping her arms tightly around herself, as if trying to hold her shattering reality together. "I just wanted to build my brand. I just wanted to be successful like you. You are my sister. You are supposed to support me." "You wanted a shortcut," I corrected her coldly. "You wanted the rewards of hard work without actually doing any of the work, and you decided I was going to pay the bill. You ruined your own life, Ashley. I am just making sure you finally pay the check." Arthur checked his heavy silver wristwatch, a gesture of profound dismissal. He looked up at the three of them, his expression completely merciless. "The time for family therapy has expired," Arthur stated coldly. "I suggest you leave my client's property. The police are currently processing a warrant for identity theft and wire fraud against Ashley, and we are looking into accessory charges for you both." The silence in the kitchen was absolute, heavy and suffocating. David stared at Arthur Penhaligon, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled completely out of the water. The threat of federal prison had finally pierced through his thick, impenetrable layer of arrogance. His face, previously flushed red with entitled rage, drained to a sickly, chalky white. Barbara let out a sharp, breathless gasp and grabbed David's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into his wrinkled polo shirt. Her legs seemed to give out slightly, forcing her to lean heavily against her husband just to remain standing. Ashley looked completely paralyzed. The reality of a police warrant processing her name was too massive for her superficial brain to comprehend. She stared at the spreadsheet on the marble island, then at the ruthless corporate attorney standing in the doorway, and finally at me. For the first time in her entire life, the golden child realized that her actions had consequences that our parents could not simply buy their way out of. Arthur took a single deliberate step forward, the polished leather of his shoe tapping sharply against the hardwood. I suggest you vacate the premises before I call local law enforcement to report a home invasion. He repeated, his tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. That broke the spell. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized the toxic trio. David grabbed Ashley by the shoulder, physically yanking her away from the kitchen island. They stumbled over each other in their haste to reach the foyer, pushing and shoving like trapped animals fleeing a burning building. Ashley did not even bother to grab her massive scuffed designer suitcase. She abandoned it right there on my floor. The front door slammed shut behind them with a violent crash, rattling the windows in their frames. A few seconds later, I listened to the frantic, high-pitched squeal of tires as their rental car tore out of my driveway and sped down the suburban street. I let out a long, slow breath. The house was finally quiet again. Arthur calmly stepped into the kitchen and packed the spreadsheet back into his pristine leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a satisfying click. Marcus, the forensic accountant, offered a tight professional nod from the dining room table. I thanked them both for their presence, locked the heavy deadbolt on the front door, and went straight down the hall to the nursery. I picked up Leo, holding his warm, sleeping body gently against my chest. He was my anchor. He was the entire reason I was tearing down the toxic, fraudulent foundation of my past, to build a clean, secure future. The profound silence in my home only lasted for 3 hours. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone began to vibrate across the kitchen counter. It buzzed once, then twice, and then erupted into a continuous, aggressive hum that made the device dance across the granite surface. I picked it up to see a massive flood of notifications completely blocking my lock screen. I had 47 new text messages, 14 missed calls, and a stream of social media alerts. None of them were from my parents or Ashley. They were from my extended family. Aunt Susan, my mother's deeply judgmental sister, had left 3 voicemails and a string of furious texts. Uncle Robert had messaged me twice. My cousins, people I had not spoken to in several months, were suddenly filling my inbox with absolute venom. I opened the first message from Aunt Susan. How could you do this to your own parents? You are sick, Chelsea. After everything they have done for you, you try to make them homeless. You need to be locked up in a psychiatric ward immediately. Another message from my cousin Greg read, disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Ashley worked so hard on her business, and you are trying to steal it because you have a miserable life. Do not ever contact this side of the family again. We are done with you. I stood in my kitchen staring at the glowing screen in complete disbelief. I had expected my parents to lie to save face, but the sheer speed and coordinated aggression of this smear campaign was breathtaking. They had barely fled my house before launching a full-scale scorched earth offensive. I opened my social media applications to find the source of the sudden outrage. It did not take long to uncover their strategy. Ashley had blasted a single link across every platform she possessed. It was immediately shared by my mother, liked by my father, and subsequently reshared by dozens of extended relatives who thrived on family drama. The link directed users to a GoFundMe campaign titled, Support Our Family Against Elder Abuse and Mental Instability. The fundraising goal was set at $50,000. I clicked on the link. The campaign featured a 10-minute video of Ashley sitting on what looked like a cheap, dingy motel bed. She was dressed in a plain, oversized gray sweatshirt. Her normally pristine hair was deliberately messy, and her makeup was artfully smudged under her eyes to make her look pale, terrified, and exhausted. The performance was nauseating in its calculation. Ashley stared directly into the camera lens, tears welling perfectly in her eyes. Hi everyone, Ashley began, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. I never thought I would have to make a video like this. Our family is going through an unimaginable nightmare right now. As many of you know, my older sister Chelsea was recently in a severe car accident. We thought she was just physically injured, but the trauma has triggered a complete terrifying mental breakdown. I watched my jaw clamp tight as Ashley blatantly and maliciously rewrote reality for an audience of hundreds. Chelsea has suffered accident-induced mental instability. Ashley cried, wiping a fake tear from her cheek with the back of her sleeve. She has become totally paranoid and delusional. She hacked into my business accounts and locked us out of our own funds. She is falsely claiming that my business, the brand I built from absolutely nothing, actually belongs to her. And worse, she has frozen our elderly parents' bank accounts. She is trying to render them homeless out of pure vindictive spite. Mom and Dad are terrified. They are staying in a cheap motel right now because Chelsea changed the locks on their house. The lies were layered so thickly I could hardly process the audacity. She painted my parents as frail, elderly victims instead of the ruthless, calculating fraudsters who had just returned from a luxury Caribbean cruise. She painted my legitimate, federally backed legal defense as the erratic, paranoid actions of a brain-damaged woman. "Please," Ashley begged the camera, her voice breaking into a perfectly pitched sob. "We need money for legal defense against this elder abuse. We need to hire attorneys to protect my business and keep a roof over our parents' heads while we try to get Chelsea the psychiatric help she desperately needs. Anything you can donate will save our family." I scrolled down to see the donations section. The campaign had been live for less than 2 hours and had already raised over $4,000. Aunt Susan had donated $500. Several of my parents' wealthy country club friends had contributed substantial amounts, leaving public comments expressing their profound shock and praying for my mental recovery. The psychological warfare was calculated and vicious. They knew they could not fight me in a court of law with forged signatures and federal wire transfers hanging over their heads. So they decided to completely destroy me in the court of public opinion. By claiming I was mentally unstable from a traumatic brain injury, they invalidated anything I might say to defend myself. If I tried to tell the truth about the fraud, the extended family would simply view it as the paranoid ramblings of a sick, delusional woman. They had completely isolated me, cutting me off from the entire family tree and poisoning my reputation. My phone continued to buzz relentlessly in my hand. More messages poured in, calling me a monster, a failure, a sociopath. They expected this barrage of hatred to break me. They expected me to panic, to call them begging for forgiveness, to drop the federal charges just to stop the overwhelming social humiliation. That is how the family dynamic had always worked. The threat of social exile was their ultimate weapon against me. I put my phone on silent. I did not shed a single tear. I did not draft a frantic emotional post trying to defend my name or argue with my cousins in the comment section. I walked over to the kitchen sink, poured myself a glass of cold water, and took a long, calming drink. I did not care what Aunt Susan thought. I did not care what the gullible country club members believed. Let them donate their money to a fraudulent GoFundMe. Let them embrace the lies. I was entirely focused on the cold, hard mechanics of justice. I walked back to the living room, checked the baby monitor to ensure Leo was still sleeping soundly, and then pulled up the secure email thread I shared with Agent Miller and Arthur Penhaligon. I copied the link to the GoFundMe campaign and forwarded it to them with a brief, precise note. "Ashley is now publicly soliciting funds under false pretenses using wire communications. Add it to the federal file." Arthur replied within 2 minutes. "Excellent. Soliciting donations based on a demonstrably fraudulent narrative constitutes a separate count of wire fraud. We will subpoena the platform to freeze those funds immediately." I closed the laptop and spent the rest of the evening feeding Leo, reading him a story, and putting him to bed. I refused to let their frantic, noisy panic infect the peace of my home. I was exactly where I needed to be. The physical pain in my shoulder was a steady reminder that I was alive, and the profound silence in my house was proof that I was finally safe from their extortion. I went to bed early and slept deeply, completely unbothered by the digital storm raging against me. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, made a pot of coffee, and opened my laptop to check my personal email. Amidst the usual promotional spam and automated calendar alerts, one specific email from my cloud storage provider sat at the very top of my inbox. Years ago, when I was still desperately trying to please my parents and foster a sense of closeness, I had set up a shared family cloud drive to easily exchange large files, holiday photos, and vacation videos. I had paid for the premium storage tier, using the same primary email address I still use today. I had long forgotten about the shared folder, and apparently in her blind panic, so had Ashley. The automated email notification read, simply, "Your shared folder, Family Media, has been updated with 3 new files by Ashley Wilson." My pulse quickened. I clicked the link authenticating my login credentials. The folder opened to reveal 3 large high-definition video files uploaded late last night. The files were automatically synced from Ashley's phone the moment she connected to the motel's Wi-Fi network. Ashley, in her infinite vanity and profound stupidity, had not just recorded the final GoFundMe video, she had recorded multiple takes, and her phone had automatically backed up the raw, unedited outtakes directly to the cloud drive I still controlled. I clicked on the first video file. It opened to show Ashley sitting on that exact same motel bed wearing the plain gray sweatshirt. But she was not crying. She was leaning forward, adjusting the camera angle, and complaining loudly to Barbara, who was standing just off screen holding a ring light. "Does my hair look messy enough?" Ashley asked, checking her reflection in the lens and actively smudging her mascara with her index finger. "I need to look pathetic. Dad, tell me if this sounds believable." David's voice boomed from the background, clear as a bell. "Cry harder on the part about the elder abuse. You need to make them think Chelsea threw us out on the street. Sell the mental breakdown angle. It is the only way we get ahead of the arrest warrant." I watched the screen, my coffee growing completely cold on the desk. This was not just a lie. It was a fully documented, premeditated performance of fraud, complete with stage directions from her co-conspirators, and the raw footage had just dropped directly into my lap. I stared at the frozen frame of Ashley adjusting her meticulously smudged mascara on my laptop screen. Without a single second of hesitation, I highlighted all 3 raw video files, downloaded them to a secure encrypted drive, and forwarded the direct cloud links to Special Agent Miller and Arthur Penhaligon. Within 10 minutes, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. It was Agent Miller. His voice was completely devoid of its usual sternness, replaced instead by a tone of dry professional amusement. He informed me that criminals generally attempted to hide their conspiracies, not back them up in high definition to a shared family cloud drive. The fraudulent GoFundMe campaign was frozen before lunch. The thousands of dollars Aunt Susan, cousin Greg, and the various country club elites had so eagerly donated were locked behind federal compliance walls. The platform placed a hard hold on the account, citing suspicious activity and a pending law enforcement inquiry. Ashley's digital plea for sympathy, designed to paint me as a mentally unstable villain and fund her legal defense, had just handed the FBI undeniable time-stamped proof of premeditated wire fraud. The smear campaign was effectively neutralizing itself legally, even if my extended family did not know it yet. For the rest of the day, my phone continued to light up with furious text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had bought completely into my parents' fabricated narrative. They called me vindictive. They called me ungrateful. They demanded that I seek immediate psychiatric help and drop the supposed vendetta against my own flesh and blood. I did not reply to a single one. I did not block their numbers either, knowing that every hateful message they sent would eventually become a testament to their own gullibility when the federal indictments finally dropped. I simply muted the notifications, set the phone face down on the counter, and turned my entirely undivided attention to my son. Leo was sitting on his playmat in the sunlit living room, shaking a brightly colored rattle and babbling happily to himself. I sat down beside him, carefully favoring my injured shoulder, and built a small tower out of soft blocks for him to knock over. The frantic, noisy panic of my extended family felt like it belonged to a different universe. I was insulated in my own home, protected by the absolute certainty of the truth. I had spent my entire life internalizing their criticism and begging for their approval. Now their collective outrage meant absolutely nothing to me. Let them believe the lies. The truth was currently sitting in a federal evidence file, The next afternoon, the crushing pressure of their frozen accounts and the collapsing GoFundMe campaign must have finally driven my parents to their absolute breaking point. I was in the kitchen preparing a bottle for Leo when my phone vibrated violently against the marble island. The caller ID flashed with my father's number. I had unblocked him earlier that morning solely on Arthur's strict advice to capture any potential self-incriminating statements or threats. I let it ring. I watched the screen glow as the call went unanswered. I expected him to leave another furious, demanding voicemail ordering me to call the bank or threatening me with complete social exile. The ringing stopped. A minute later, a new voicemail notification pinged on my screen. I tapped the icon, noticing immediately that the audio file was unusually long, clocking in at nearly 4 minutes. I pressed play, expecting David's booming, authoritative voice to fill the kitchen. Instead, the audio began with a loud, rhythmic thumping, followed by the muffled roar of a car engine and the aggressive swish of windshield wipers. It was a pocket dial. David, in his frantic, technologically incompetent haste, had forgotten to lock his screen after attempting to call me. The phone was now broadcasting live from the dark confines of his pocket, capturing everything happening inside their vehicle. For the first 30 seconds, there was only the sound of heavy breathing, the turn signal clicking rhythmically, and the hum of tires on wet pavement. Then Barbara's voice shattered the tense silence. She sounded hysterical, her voice pitched high and tight with raw, unfiltered panic. "We are going to lose the Beacon Hill house!" David, Barbara shrieked, her voice echoing sharply in the enclosed space of the car. "The bank just called my cell phone. They received a federal compliance notice. The GoFundMe account is completely locked down. Ashley is practically catatonic in the back seat. You told me Arthur Penhaligon was just trying to scare us to protect Chelsea's money. You told me Chelsea would back down and open the accounts if we brought the rest of the extended family in on it, and threatened to ruin her reputation." David's voice fired back, sharp, ragged, and venomous. "Shut up, Barbara. Just shut up and let me think for one single minute. I cannot strategize when you are screaming in my ear. I am handling it. I am going to call Henry at the regional bank branch. I have played golf with him for 10 years. I will call in a favor and get him to lift the freeze on our primary checking." Barbara let out a harsh, bitter laugh that bordered on a sob. "A favor? Are you completely delusional? We have federal agents tearing apart our home office. The entire neighborhood saw them carrying boxes out of our front door. Henry is not going to return your calls, David. He is going to run in the opposite direction to protect his own career. We have no cash. The credit cards are declining at the grocery store. We need to drive back to Chelsea's house and force her to drop these charges right now. Tell her we will apologize for the cruise. Tell her whatever she wants to hear. If Ashley goes to federal prison for that stupid business loan, I will never ever forgive you." The sound of a car horn blared loudly through the phone speaker, followed by David swearing violently and swerving the vehicle. The sudden movement caused the phone in his pocket to rustle against the fabric of his trousers. "You think Ashley is the only one in trouble?" David roared, completely losing the last shred of his tightly controlled temper. "You think a fraudulent business loan for a fake boutique is our biggest problem right now? You are entirely blind to the reality of what your daughter just unleashed." "What are you talking about?" Barbara demanded, her voice dropping into a frightened whisper. "If Chelsea does not drop these charges, the feds are going to audit our entire financial history," David yelled, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "They are not just going to stop at the SBA loan. They are going to pull the asset records. They are going to pull the collateral files on the boat, Barbara." The boat. Barbara went entirely silent. The air in the car seemed to turn to solid ice. Even through the muffled audio of the pocket dial, the sheer weight of David's words was palpable. "What about the boat?" Barbara finally whispered, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. David let out a ragged, desperate breath, the sound of a man who realized he was completely out of options. "When I bought the yacht 3 years ago, I did not have the liquid capital to secure the primary loan," he confessed, his voice thick with dread. "The bank required a secondary guarantor because my debt-to-income ratio was entirely leveraged. I used Harrison's name as the secondary collateral. I forged the old man's signature on the guarantor documents and pushed it through a broker who did not ask questions. If the FBI digs into my asset portfolio to trace Chelsea's money, they will find the Marine Registry. They will know I committed federal fraud against a billionaire. The recording captured a sharp, terrified gasp from my mother, followed by the sound of David hitting the steering wheel repeatedly with the palm of his hand. The voicemail cut off abruptly with a digital beep, plunging my bright kitchen back into absolute silence. I stood frozen by the marble island, the digital recording echoing in my mind. The Small Business Administration loan they had taken out using my social security number was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the entry-level fraud that had funded Ashley's fake life. But my father, the man who constantly lectured me on financial responsibility, who berated me for not understanding the value of a dollar, had forged my grandfather's signature to buy a luxury yacht. He had committed massive brazen fraud against his own father-in-law, a ruthless corporate titan, just to maintain his pathetic facade of extreme wealth and country club dominance. I did not waste a single second processing the emotional betrayal. I forwarded the audio file directly to Grandpa Harrison and Arthur Penhaligon. Then I initiated a three-way secure conference call. Harrison answered on the first ring. He had already listened to the recording. I expected him to be furious. I expected him to shout to curse David's name or demand immediate explosive vengeance. But when Harrison spoke, his voice was entirely flat, devoid of any heat or elevated emotion. It was the terrifying absolute calm of a man who was about to dismantle someone's existence brick by brick. He forged my signature on a marine collateral loan. Harrison stated, his tone chillingly precise. David has always been an arrogant fool, Chelsea, but I never realized he was genuinely suicidal. Arthur's voice chimed in from his downtown office, smooth, calculating, and deadly. I am pulling the Marine Registry and the bank collateral files right now, Mr. Harrison. If David secured a luxury vessel using your name and your corporate assets without authorization, we are looking at an entirely new catastrophic category of federal bank fraud. This elevates the total stolen value well over $1 million. I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out the window at my quiet, peaceful street. What do we do now? I asked. Do we send this audio file directly to Agent Miller to add to the indictment? Harrison paused for a long moment. We will hand it to the federal authorities, Chelsea. But first we are going to handle this as a family. We are going to look them directly in the eye when the floor finally drops out from under them. Arthur, when is the annual estate meeting? The annual family estate meeting was a pretentious, ridiculous tradition Barbara had insisted upon years ago to mimic the habits of old money dynasties. Once a year, the entire extended family gathered at the Oak Ridge Country Club to discuss family trusts, future investments, and legacy planning. In reality, it was just an expensive excuse for my parents to show off their wealth, boast about Ashley's fake accomplishments, and secure their status as the absolute leaders of the family hierarchy. It was the one event of the year where attendance was strictly mandatory. It is scheduled for this coming Saturday. Arthur confirmed, the sound of typing echoing through the phone line. In the private mahogany dining room at Oak Ridge. I have already confirmed that David and Barbara are attending. They are desperate to keep up appearances. They are planning to use the meeting to further the smear campaign against Chelsea, play the victims, and solidify financial support from the extended family to fight the impending legal battle. Harrison let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a shiver down my spine. Excellent. Let them gather the entire family in one room. Let them put on their finest clothes, drink expensive champagne, and prepare their tragic speeches about how mentally unstable you are, Chelsea. Let them feel completely secure in their lies. He paused, the silence hanging heavy and absolute over the conference line. We are going to attend that meeting, Harrison commanded. We are going to walk into that country club, wait for David to take the floor to solicit funds, and then we are going to end this war. The heavy wrought iron gates of Grandpa Harrison's sprawling estate loomed ahead, casting long, sharp shadows across the pristine driveway. Late last night, Harrison had abruptly changed the venue of the annual financial review. He moved it from the Oak Ridge Country Club directly to his own private property, citing a need for absolute discretion and family privacy. In reality, it was a tactical maneuver. This was his territory. He controlled the access, he controlled the security cameras, and he controlled the exits. I parked my car near the massive stone fountain in the courtyard, and took a slow, steadying breath. My left arm was still secured tightly in its black medical sling, a dull ache radiating from my collarbone, but my mind was completely clear. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the towering limestone mansion. The grand parlor of the estate was a room designed to intimidate. It featured vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured grounds, and a massive marble fireplace. Usually, the annual estate meeting was a boisterous affair filled with clinking champagne flutes and loud, boastful conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes. Today, the atmosphere was entirely different. It felt like a funeral where everyone despised the deceased. There were roughly 50 extended relatives gathered in the parlor. Aunts, uncles, second cousins, and family business associates were mingling in small, tight clusters. The moment my shoes clicked against the polished marble floor of the entryway, the low hum of conversation stopped dead. 50 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. The silence was thick, heavy, and absolutely suffocating. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered a greeting. The hostility rolling off them was a physical force. I kept my chin high and my posture perfectly straight, scanning the room until I found my targets. David, Barbara, and Ashley were holding court in the very center of the parlor, seated together on a plush antique velvet sofa. Their visual presentation was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Normally, my family treated this event like a runway show, wearing their most expensive designer labels and flashing their heaviest jewelry to assert dominance over the lesser-earning relatives. Today they had dressed for a tragedy. Ashley wore a shapeless, faded beige sweater that swallowed her frame. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, messy knot, and she wore absolutely no makeup, leaving her face looking pale and drawn. She sat with her knees pulled tightly together, staring blankly at the floor, like a traumatized victim who could barely function. David stood directly behind her, dressed in a muted gray suit, resting his hand heavily on her shoulder, in a display of stoic, protective fatherhood. Barbara sat beside Ashley, clutching a lace handkerchief. She looked exhausted, occasionally dabbing at her dry eyes and offering weak, brave smiles to the relatives who approached them. They were playing the martyrs, basking in the glow of collective sympathy. The extended family was swarming them, offering hushed words of comfort, patting David on the back and shooting me looks of absolute, unadulterated disgust. I did not take a single step backward. I walked directly into the room. Aunt Susan intercepted me before I could even reach the catering table. My mother's older sister had always been a deeply judgmental woman who thrived on gossip and social hierarchy. Today she looked at me as if I had tracked something vile onto the bottom of my shoe. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here today, Chelsea." Aunt Susan hissed, her voice low and vibrating with venom. "After everything you have put your parents through this week, you just waltz in here like nothing is wrong. You are completely sick." I looked at her, keeping my expression entirely blank. "Good morning to you too, Aunt Susan." "Do not use that tone with me," she snapped, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "We all saw the video Ashley posted. We all know exactly what is going on. Your mother called me crying her eyes out yesterday. She told me the police actually showed up at their house because you filed some delusional paranoid report. You are trying to put your own sister in jail because you are having a mental breakdown." Before I could respond, Uncle Robert stepped up beside his wife. He was a wealthy investment banker who always used his corporate negotiation voice to talk down to people. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking at my medical sling with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Chelsea, listen to me," Uncle Robert said, adopting a patronizing, soothing tone. "We understand you were in a terrible car crash. We know you suffered a severe head injury. Traumatic brain injuries can cause extreme paranoia and erratic behavior. The doctors warned your parents this might happen. But you are tearing this family apart with these wild accusations about fraud and stolen money. You need to drop the police reports immediately and check yourself into a facility before you cause permanent damage to your family's reputation." The sheer scale of the gaslighting was breathtaking. My parents had primed the entire family. They had weaponized my physical injuries using my car accident to build a bulletproof narrative that I was clinically insane. They had convinced 50 intelligent, educated people that my federally backed fraud investigation was nothing more than a hallucination caused by head trauma. I was in a car crash, Uncle Robert, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I did not suffer a traumatic brain injury. I suffered a broken collarbone. My mind is functioning perfectly well. There are no hallucinations. Ashley committed federal wire fraud and David and Barbara are accessories. Cousin Greg pushed his way through the gathering crowd, his face flushed red with aggressive indignation. He was Ashley's age and had always adored her. You are a liar, Greg barked, pointing a finger directly at my face. Ashley worked for years to build her business. She is successful, and you are just a bitter, jealous sociopath who cannot stand to see her shine. She is terrified of you, Chelsea. Aunt Barbara and Uncle David are staying in a motel because you froze their bank accounts and tried to make them homeless. You are trying to destroy our grandparents' legacy out of pure spite. The tension in the room was rapidly escalating into a mob mentality. More aunts and uncles gathered around, forming a physical wall that blocked my path to the rest of the room. They were pressing in on me, their faces contorted with self-righteous anger. The pressure was designed to break me, to make me panic, to make me cry and flee the room in disgrace, which would only serve to validate their belief that I was mentally unstable. You are going to fix this right now, Aunt Susan demanded, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. You are going to walk over to that sofa, you are going to get on your knees, and you are going to apologize to your mother. Then you are going to call the police and tell them you made a terrible mistake because your medication is messing with your head. You will make things right for the sake of family unity, or you will be cut out of this family forever. Do you understand me? I looked at the hostile faces surrounding me. I looked at Aunt Susan's furious glaring eyes, Uncle Robert's condescending frown, and Cousin Greg's aggressive posture. Beyond them I could see David watching the confrontation. A tiny triumphant smirk briefly flashed across his stoic mask. He thought he had won. He thought the sheer weight of social pressure would force me into submission. He believed that isolating me from the entire family tree would make me drop the charges. What David did not know was that Grandpa Harrison and Arthur Penhaligon were currently sitting in the estate's private security office, watching this entire interaction through high-definition cameras with live audio feeds. They were watching every single relative who actively chose to defend a fraudster and attack a victim. I am not apologizing to anyone, I said, my voice cutting through the noise with absolute clarity. And I am certainly not dropping the federal charges. Aunt Susan gasped, her hand flying to her chest in theatrical horror. You are a monster, she whispered. A heavy brass chime echoed through the grand parlor, cutting off any further attacks. It was the traditional signal that the formal financial review was about to begin. The heavy mahogany doors leading into the main dining hall swung open, and the estate staff directed the family to take their seats. The crowd surrounding me slowly dispersed, shooting me final glares of disgust as they filed into the dining hall. I followed them, my head held high completely, ignoring the toxic whispers that trailed in my wake. The dining hall was arranged with rows of plush chairs facing a large podium. I took a seat in the very back row, isolated and alone, exactly as they wanted me. David, Barbara, and Ashley sat in the front row, holding hands in a repulsive display of manufactured solidarity. The room buzzed with low, angry tension. The extended family was waiting for Grandpa Harrison to take the stage and restore order. They were waiting for the patriarch to publicly reprimand me and save David from his supposed financial distress. Instead, the room fell silent as Barbara suddenly stood up. She did not walk to the podium. She simply turned to face the rows of seated relatives. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a fresh, pristine white tissue. She gripped it tightly in both hands, her lip trembling violently. She took a deep, shuddering breath, ensuring every single eye in the room was fixed directly upon her. She was preparing to deliver the performance of a lifetime. Barbara raised the pristine white tissue to her nose, letting out a soft, rehearsed sniffle that carried perfectly across the silent dining hall. She looked at the faces of her extended family, her eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. For 30 years, she had manipulated this exact audience with half-truths and polished smiles. Today, she was entirely reliant on their ingrained habit of believing her. Family is everything to us. Barbara began, her voice quivering with exactly the right amount of manufactured heartbreak. We have always prided ourselves on sticking together through the hardest times. And right now, David, Ashley, and I are facing an unimaginable tragedy. She paused, looking down at the polished mahogany floor before raising her eyes to look directly at Grandpa Harrison, who sat quietly at the head of the center table. As many of you know, our beloved Chelsea was in a horrific car accident last week. Barbara continued, her tone dripping with maternal sorrow. We nearly lost her. The doctors warned us that severe physical trauma can sometimes trigger catastrophic mental instability. We prayed it would not happen. But the reality is, the daughter we raised, the sister Ashley loved so dearly, is gone. Her mind has been entirely warped by paranoia and delusion. A collective murmur of sympathy rippled through the seated relatives. Aunt Susan pressed a hand to her chest, shaking her head in pity. Cousin Greg glared at me from his seat. I sat in the back row, my face an impenetrable mask, watching my mother systematically attempt to assassinate my character to save her own skin. She has become completely unhinged. Barbara cried, a single perfect tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. She has convinced herself that Ashley's beautiful new business is a fraud. She is claiming that David and I are stealing from her. And out of pure delusion-fueled spite, she has used her corporate connections to freeze our bank accounts. She filed false police reports to have her own sister investigated. She has cut off the small monthly stipend she promised us years ago to help with our mortgage. Barbara took a step toward the center aisle, extending her hands in a gesture of utter helplessness. We have nothing, she pleaded, her voice breaking into a ragged sob. David and I are currently living out of a cheap motel. We cannot even buy groceries. We are facing foreclosure on our family home, all because Chelsea's brain injury has turned her against us. We do not want to fight her. We just want to get her the psychiatric help she so desperately needs, but we cannot do it while she is actively trying to render us homeless. She turned her weeping eyes back to Grandpa Harrison. The entire room held its breath. Dad, please, Barbara begged, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You are the head of this family. You are the only one she might still listen to. Please intervene. Make her see reason. Force her to reinstate the monthly payments so we can save our home, and compel her to drop these delusional police charges before she ruins Ashley's future and destroys our family permanently. We need to make things right. We need family unity now more than ever. Barbara finished her speech and sank back into her chair beside David, burying her face in her hands as she wept openly. Ashley rubbed her mother's back, glaring at me, with a look of absolute venomous triumph. The trap was set. The extended family was completely on their side. Several aunts and uncles turned in their seats to glare at me. Uncle Robert leaned across the aisle, his face red with righteous indignation. You need to fix this right now, Chelsea. Uncle Robert hissed loudly enough for the surrounding rows to hear. You are a disgrace. Drop the charges and pay your parents what you owe them. I did not look at Uncle Robert. I kept my eyes fixed entirely on the head of the table. Grandpa Harrison sat completely motionless for a long, heavy moment. He did not look at Barbara with the sympathetic warmth of a concerned father. He did not look at David with respect. He looked at them with the cold, detached calculation of a predator watching its prey step willingly into a snare. Slowly, deliberately, Harrison pushed his chair back and stood up. The murmurs and angry whispers in the room instantly died down. The patriarch had the floor. Family unity is a beautiful concept, Barbara Harrison began, his voice deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of emotion. He placed his hands flat on the polished table, his imposing frame dominating the front of the room. It requires honesty, transparency, and a mutual commitment to the truth. You claim that Chelsea is suffering from delusions. You claim she is tearing this family apart with paranoid accusations of theft and fraud. He paused, letting his steely gaze sweep across the front row, locking onto David, who suddenly looked incredibly rigid in his chair. I think it is time we talk about who is actually tearing this family apart, Harrison stated. He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and retrieved a small, sleek silver remote control. Without breaking eye contact with David, Harrison pointed the remote toward the far wall, where the estate's high-end customized surround sound audio system was seamlessly integrated into the woodwork. He pressed a single button. There was a sharp digital click, followed by the undeniable sound of a car engine roaring to life. The audio was incredibly crisp, booming from speakers hidden in every corner of the dining hall. The rhythmic thumping of windshield wipers filled the room, followed immediately by the sound of Barbara's voice. It was not the weeping, fragile voice of a victim she had just displayed to the family. It was a hysterical, venomous shriek. "We are going to lose the Beacon Hill house. David, the recorded." Barbara screamed, her voice vibrating with pure panic. "The bank just called my cell phone. They received a federal compliance notice. The GoFundMe account is completely locked down. Ashley is practically catatonic in the back seat. You told me Arthur Penhaligon was just trying to scare us to protect Chelsea's money." A collective gasp swept through the dining hall. Aunt Susan stiffened, her jaw dropping open. Cousin Greg blinked rapidly, looking confusedly from the speakers to the front row. Barbara froze in her chair, the tissue slipping from her fingers and fluttering to the floor. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a wax mannequin. The audio continued, broadcasting their absolute ruin to the entire family tree. "You told me Chelsea would back down and open the accounts if we brought the rest of the extended family in on it, and threatened to ruin her reputation." The recording blasted. Uncle Robert turned his head, staring at David with a look of dawning horror. The realization that they had been deliberately used as pawns in a coordinated extortion scheme was beginning to register across the room. "Shut up!" Barbara David's recorded voice roared back, vicious and cruel. "Just shut up and let me think for one single minute. I cannot strategize when you are screaming in my ear. I am handling it. I am going to call Henry at the regional bank branch. I have played golf with him for 10 years. I will call in a favor and get him to lift the freeze on our primary checking. The real." David sank lower into his plush chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He was staring straight ahead, trapped in a nightmare he could not wake up from. "A favor? Are you completely delusional?" the recorded Barbara shrieked, letting out a bitter, terrified laugh. "We have federal agents tearing apart our home office. The entire neighborhood saw them carrying boxes out of our front door. Henry is not going to return your calls, David. We have no cash. We need to drive back to Chelsea's house and force her to drop these charges right now. Tell her we will apologize for the cruise. Tell her whatever she wants to hear. If Ashley goes to federal prison for that stupid business loan, I will never ever forgive you." The entire dining hall was paralyzed. No one dared to breathe. The illusion of the frail, victimized parents had been incinerated in less than 60 seconds. Ashley, who had been playing the traumatized daughter, put her hands over her ears, shutting her eyes tightly, as if she could block out the reality of her own federal exposure. Then came the moment that shattered everything. The sound of the car swerving echoed through the speakers, followed by David's explosive, desperate rage. "You think Ashley is the only one in trouble?" David's voice bellowed, the panic raw and unfiltered. "You think a fraudulent business loan for a fake boutique is our biggest problem right now? You are entirely blind to the reality of what your daughter just unleashed." "What are you talking about?" Barbara whispered on the tape. "If Chelsea does not drop these charges, the feds are going to audit our entire financial history," David yelled. "They are not just going to stop at the SBA loan, they are going to pull the asset records. They are going to pull the collateral files on the boat." Barbara. The boat. The silence in the dining hall was absolute. Every single relative was holding their breath, sensing the catastrophic drop that was about to occur. "When I bought the yacht 3 years ago, I did not have the liquid capital to secure the primary loan," David's recorded voice confessed, thick with absolute dread. "The bank required a secondary guarantor because my debt-to-income ratio was entirely leveraged. I used Harrison's name as the secondary collateral. I forged the old man's signature on the guarantor documents and pushed it through a broker who did not ask questions. If the FBI digs into my asset portfolio to trace Chelsea's money, they will find the Marine Registry. They will know I committed federal fraud against a billionaire." The recording cut off with a sharp beep. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy, and absolutely lethal. 50 people sat completely frozen, staring in sheer horror at the front row. David looked as though all the blood had been siphoned from his body. His face was a sickly, chalky white, his mouth hanging slightly open. He looked utterly terrified, stripped of his bravado, his lies, and his false martyrdom. Barbara sat completely paralyzed beside him, her hands trembling violently in her lap. Ashley stared blankly ahead, the reality of her impending federal prison sentence finally sinking into her superficial mind. Grandpa Harrison placed the small silver remote gently onto the mahogany table. The quiet clink of the metal against the wood sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked down at David, his gray eyes devoid of any mercy, any forgiveness, or any family loyalty. He was looking at a thief who had foolishly tried to steal from the one man who could utterly destroy him. I did not let the silence linger. I did not give David a single second to formulate a new lie to pivot his defense or to attempt to gaslight the room. I stood up from my chair in the back row. The sound of my shoes against the polished hardwood floor drew every eye away from my grandfather and toward me. I walked down the center aisle, my posture perfectly straight, despite the dull throbbing ache radiating from my injured collarbone. The dining hall at the Oak Ridge Country Club was equipped with a state-of-the-art presentation system, a massive digital screen, usually utilized by Uncle Robert to display quarterly portfolio gains in real estate acquisitions. I stepped up to the mahogany podium, pulled my tablet from my leather tote bag with my uninjured hand, and plugged in the display cable. "That is just the beginning," I said, my voice projecting clearly and coldly through the room's high-fidelity speakers. "Let us look at the real financial statements." I tapped the screen of my tablet. Behind me, the massive projector flared bright white before resolving into a high-definition wall-sized image of the spreadsheet Arthur's forensic accountant had prepared. The numbers were bold black and absolutely undeniable. I pointed to the first highlighted block of data on the left side of the screen. "For the past 6 years, David and Barbara Wilson have extorted $3,800 from me. Every single month," I explained, keeping my tone as clinical and detached as a surgeon performing an autopsy. They sat in my living room, cried real tears, and claimed they were on the brink of foreclosure. They used my sense of family duty, my loyalty, and my basic human empathy to bleed my accounts dry. I pressed a button on the podium, advancing to the next slide. A certified federal bank record appeared on the screen, stamped with official seals. "But as you can see from these documents, their mortgage was paid off in full over a decade ago," I stated. "There was no bank threatening to take their home. There was no financial ruin. It was a completely fabricated crisis designed specifically to manipulate me." A collective gasp swept through the rows of seated relatives. Aunt Susan, who had been screaming in my face just 20 minutes ago, raised a trembling hand to her mouth. Uncle Robert adjusted his glasses, staring at the screen in profound disbelief. The air in the room grew instantly heavy with the realization of the massive deception. "So where did that money go?" I asked the silent room. "It went here." I advanced to the third slide. The screen displayed a digitized copy of a commercial loan application. I zoomed in heavily on the applicant details and the signature line at the bottom of the page. "This is a $150,000 small business administration loan taken out for Ashley Aesthetics, LLC." I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "But if you look closely at the guarantor section, you will not see Ashley's financial credentials. You will see my social security number. You will see my private federal tax returns, which David and Barbara intercepted from my mail. And you will see a completely forged signature. That is my name, but it is absolutely not my handwriting." The murmurs in the room grew louder, evolving from shock into genuine horror. Uncle Robert, a man who understood the catastrophic severity of federal wire fraud better than anyone else in the room, literally recoiled in his chair. He looked at David as if the man were radioactive. "They stole my identity to secure a massive commercial loan for Ashley's fake lifestyle brand," I explained, pacing slowly behind the podium. "And when Ashley immediately squandered the principal on luxury vacations, designer clothes, and spa treatments, they realized they could not make the monthly payments. They were terrified the federal government would investigate the default and uncover the forgery. So they manufactured the foreclosure lie to make me pay for it." I advanced to the final slide. It was a flowchart, a visual map tracing the exact movement of stolen funds across different banking institutions. Every single month, my $3,800 was routed into David and Barbara's joint account, I said, tracing the digital line with my finger. Within 48 hours, $3,200 was automatically drafted to the SBA, to cover the minimum interest payment on the fraudulent loan. The remaining $600 was deposited directly into Ashley's personal checking account as an allowance. I hit the screen one last time. A massive number appeared in bold red font in the very center of the projector screen. The grand total of their systematic theft amounts to exactly $410,400, I announced, letting the massive sum hang over their heads. They funded a fantasy life using my identity. And when I survived a severe car crash and discovered the missing funds, they realized the bank was going to catch on. So instead of confessing, they decided to launch a vicious public smear campaign. They gathered you all here today to convince you that I was clinically insane, hoping that if they completely isolated me, I would drop the charges out of sheer social pressure. I turned away from the screen and looked directly at the front row. David was sweating profusely, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip his knees to keep them still. Barbara was staring blankly ahead, completely broken. Ashley looked like she was going to vomit. They did not gather you here for a family meeting, I concluded, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They gathered you here to make you accomplices in a federal cover-up. The silence in the dining hall lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the entire room exploded. The very people who had been ready to crucify me in the parlor abruptly turned their collective fury onto the front row. The illusion of the benevolent parents and the successful entrepreneur daughter was entirely incinerated, leaving nothing but the ugly, pathetic reality of their greed. David, have you completely lost your mind? Uncle Robert roared, standing up from his chair and pointing an accusing finger at his brother-in-law. Do you have any idea what you have done? You forged Harrison's signature on a marine collateral loan. You committed federal fraud against the Small Business Administration using your own daughter's identity. You are going to federal prison, and you tried to drag the reputation of this entire family down with you. Aunt Susan, whose face was now a mottled shade of furious purple, marched directly up to Barbara. You lied to my face! Susan shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the room. You called me weeping yesterday, telling me Chelsea was having a psychotic break. You let me donate $500 to a fraudulent GoFundMe campaign just to pay your legal fees. You are a disgusting, manipulative thief, Barbara. Cousin Greg, who had aggressively defended Ashley's honor just moments ago, looked at her with pure, unadulterated revulsion. Your entire business is a fake, Greg yelled over the chaos. You do not even have a brand, Ashley. You are just a parasite living off stolen money. You are pathetic. The sheer weight of the family's rage crashed down on the front row. The mob mentality that David and Barbara had so carefully cultivated to destroy me was now tearing them apart. Cornered, humiliated, and facing absolute ruin, the toxic trio did exactly what cowards always do. They turned on each other. David jumped up from his chair, his face contorted in a desperate, ugly panic. He threw his hands up, physically backing away from his wife and his favored daughter. This was not my idea, David shouted, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of the room. This was Barbara's doing. She handled the paperwork for Ashley. She could not bear to see her precious daughter fail at another business. She brought the tax returns to the house. I just paid the bills to keep us afloat. Barbara's head snapped toward her husband, her eyes wide with absolute betrayal. The fragile, weeping victim act vanished, instantly replaced by a vicious, cornered fury. She stood up, knocking her chair backward onto the hardwood floor. You arrogant coward, Barbara screamed, her voice completely raw. Do not you dare try to put this all on me. You knew exactly where that money was coming from. You signed the marine collateral documents yourself. You forged my father's signature for a boat because your fragile ego could not handle being the poorest man at the country club. You are the one who demanded we push Chelsea for more money so you could keep up appearances. You lied to me, Ashley shrieked, suddenly joining the fray. She stomped her foot on the ground, throwing a massive childish tantrum in the middle of a federal fraud crisis. You promised me I would not get in trouble. You said Chelsea owed us because she lived at home during college. You said her credit was going to waste and that I deserved a chance to be successful. You are a spoiled brat who refused to get a real job. David roared back at his daughter, completely abandoning his role as the stoic protector. We ruined our lives trying to fund your pathetic vanity project, and you could not even generate a single dollar of actual revenue. You are both disgusting, Barbara yelled, slapping David's arm away as he tried to gesture toward her. You destroyed this family, David. The dining hall dissolved into absolute pandemonium. Aunts and uncles were shouting demands for restitution. Cousins were recording the meltdown on their phones, and David, Barbara, and Ashley were viciously tearing each other apart, screaming accusations, and airing decades of toxic resentments in front of the entire family tree. They were throwing each other to the wolves in a desperate, pathetic attempt to save themselves from the impending federal indictments. I stood behind the mahogany podium watching the people who had tortured me for 34 years finally consume themselves in a fire of their own making. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I felt entirely wonderfully free. The heavy wrought iron gates of Grandpa Harrison's sprawling estate loomed ahead, casting long, sharp shadows across the pristine driveway. Late last night, Harrison had abruptly changed the venue of the annual financial review. He moved it from the Oak Ridge Country Club directly to his own private property, citing a need for absolute discretion and family privacy. In reality, it was a tactical maneuver. This was his territory. He controlled the access, he controlled the security cameras, and he controlled the exits. I parked my car near the massive stone fountain in the courtyard and took a slow, steadying breath. My left arm was still secured tightly in its black medical sling, a dull ache radiating from my collarbone, but my mind was completely clear. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the towering limestone mansion. The grand parlor of the estate was a room designed to intimidate. It featured vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the manicured grounds, and a massive marble fireplace. Usually the annual estate meeting was a boisterous affair filled with clinking champagne flutes and loud boastful conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes. Today the atmosphere was entirely different. It felt like a funeral where everyone despised the deceased. There were roughly 50 extended relatives gathered in the parlor. Aunts, uncles, second cousins, and family business associates were mingling in small, tight clusters. The moment my shoes clicked against the polished marble floor of the entryway, the low hum of conversation stopped dead. 50 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. The silence was thick, heavy, and absolutely suffocating. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered a greeting. The hostility rolling off them was a physical force. I kept my chin high and my posture perfectly straight, scanning the room until I found my targets. David, Barbara, and Ashley were holding court in the very center of the parlor, seated together on a plush antique velvet sofa. Their visual presentation was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Normally, my family treated this event like a runway show, wearing their most expensive designer labels and flashing their heaviest jewelry to assert dominance over the lesser-earning relatives. Today, they had dressed for a tragedy. Ashley wore a shapeless, faded beige sweater that swallowed her frame. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, messy knot, and she wore absolutely no makeup, leaving her face looking pale and drawn. She sat with her knees pulled tightly together, staring blankly at the floor, like a traumatized victim who could barely function. David stood directly behind her, dressed in a muted gray suit, resting his hand heavily on her shoulder, in a display of stoic protective fatherhood. Barbara sat beside Ashley, clutching a lace handkerchief. She looked exhausted, occasionally dabbing at her dry eyes and offering weak, brave smiles to the relatives who approached them. They were playing the martyrs, basking in the glow of collective sympathy. The extended family was swarming them, offering hushed words of comfort, patting David on the back, and shooting me looks of absolute, unadulterated disgust. I did not take a single step backward. I walked directly into the room. Aunt Susan intercepted me before I could even reach the catering table. My mother's older sister had always been a deeply judgmental woman who thrived on gossip and social hierarchy. Today she looked at me as if I had tracked something vile onto the bottom of my shoe. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here today, Chelsea." Aunt Susan hissed, her voice low and vibrating with venom. "After everything you have put your parents through this week, you just waltz in here like nothing is wrong. You are completely sick." I looked at her, keeping my expression entirely blank. "Good morning to you too, Aunt Susan." "Do not use that tone with me," she snapped, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "We all saw the video Ashley posted. We all know exactly what is going on. Your mother called me crying her eyes out yesterday. She told me the police actually showed up at their house because you filed some delusional paranoid report. You are trying to put your own sister in jail because you are having a mental breakdown. Before I could respond, Uncle Robert stepped up beside his wife. He was a wealthy investment banker who always used his corporate negotiation voice to talk down to people. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking at my medical sling with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Chelsea, listen to me," Uncle Robert said, adopting a patronizing, soothing tone. "We understand you were in a terrible car crash. We know you suffered a severe head injury. Traumatic brain injuries can cause extreme paranoia and erratic behavior. The doctors warned your parents this might happen. But you are tearing this family apart with these wild accusations about fraud and stolen money. You need to drop the police reports immediately and check yourself into a facility before you cause permanent damage to your family's reputation." The sheer scale of the gaslighting was breathtaking. My parents had primed the entire family. They had weaponized my physical injuries using my car accident to build a bulletproof narrative that I was clinically insane. They had convinced 50 intelligent, educated people that my federally backed fraud investigation was nothing more than a hallucination caused by head trauma. "I was in a car crash, Uncle Robert," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I did not suffer a traumatic brain injury. I suffered a broken collarbone. My mind is functioning perfectly well. There are no hallucinations. Ashley committed federal wire fraud and David and Barbara are accessories." Cousin Greg pushed his way through the gathering crowd, his face flushed red with aggressive indignation. He was Ashley's age and had always adored her. "You are a liar!" Greg barked, pointing a finger directly at my face. "Ashley worked for years to build her business. She is successful, and you are just a bitter, jealous sociopath who cannot stand to see her shine. She is terrified of you, Chelsea. Aunt Barbara and Uncle David are staying in a motel because you froze their bank accounts and tried to make them homeless. You are trying to destroy our grandparents' legacy out of pure spite." The tension in the room was rapidly escalating into a mob mentality. More aunts and uncles gathered around, forming a physical wall that blocked my path to the rest of the room. They were pressing in on me, their faces contorted with self-righteous anger. The pressure was designed to break me, to make me panic, to make me cry and flee the room in disgrace, which would only serve to validate their belief that I was mentally unstable. "You are going to fix this right now," Aunt Susan demanded, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "You are going to walk over to that sofa, you are going to get on your knees, and you are going to apologize to your mother. Then you are going to call the police and tell them you made a terrible mistake because your medication is messing with your head. You will make things right for the sake of family unity, or you will be cut out of this family forever. Do you understand me?" I looked at the hostile faces surrounding me. I looked at Aunt Susan's furious, glaring eyes, Uncle Robert's condescending frown, and Cousin Greg's aggressive posture. Beyond them, I could see David watching the confrontation. A tiny, triumphant smirk briefly flashed across his stoic mask. He thought he had won. He thought the sheer weight of social pressure would force me into submission. He believed that isolating me from the entire family tree would make me drop the charges. What David did not know was that Grandpa Harrison and Arthur Penhaligon were currently sitting in the estate's private security office, watching this entire interaction through high-definition cameras with live audio feeds. They were watching every single relative who actively chose to defend a fraudster and attack a victim. "I am not apologizing to anyone," I said, my voice cutting through the noise with absolute clarity. "And I am certainly not dropping the federal charges." Aunt Susan gasped, her hand flying to her chest in theatrical horror. "You are a monster," she whispered. A heavy brass chime echoed through the grand parlor, cutting off any further attacks. It was the traditional signal that the formal financial review was about to begin. The heavy mahogany doors leading into the main dining hall swung open, and the estate staff directed the family to take their seats. The crowd surrounding me slowly dispersed, shooting me final glares of disgust as they filed into the dining hall. I followed them, my head held high completely, ignoring the toxic whispers that trailed in my wake. The dining hall was arranged with rows of plush chairs facing a large podium. I took a seat in the very back row, isolated and alone, exactly as they wanted me. David, Barbara, and Ashley sat in the front row holding hands in a repulsive display of manufactured solidarity. The room buzzed with low, angry tension. The extended family was waiting for Grandpa Harrison to take the stage and restore order. They were waiting for the patriarch to publicly reprimand me and save David from his supposed financial distress. Instead, the room fell silent as Barbara suddenly stood up. She did not walk to the podium. She simply turned to face the rows of seated relatives. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a fresh, pristine white tissue. She gripped it tightly in both hands, her lip trembling violently. She took a deep, shuddering breath, ensuring every single eye in the room was fixed directly upon her. She was preparing to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I stood behind the mahogany podium, watching the people who had tortured me for 34 years finally consume themselves in a fire of their own making. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I felt entirely wonderfully free. Grandpa Harrison raised his hand again, and the dining hall, which had been vibrating with the violent echoes of their infighting, instantly snapped back into absolute silence. The 50 extended relatives, having just witnessed the complete self-destruction of David and Barbara's carefully cultivated image, were now holding their breath. They knew the patriarch was not finished. The audio recording had decimated the illusion. Now it was time for the final legal execution. Harrison gestured sharply to Arthur Penhaligon. The attorney stepped forward, unclasped the heavy brass latch of the thick black leather binder, and opened it to the center. He pulled out a stack of documents, each page bearing the unmistakable seal of the federal court and the dense, heavy watermark of Harrison's primary estate trust. This, Harrison said, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings, is the consequence of your greed. Barbara, who had collapsed into a sobbing, pathetic heap in her chair, let out a choked, terrified gasp. David was still on his knees, his face an ashen, sickly white, his chest heaving as if the air had been entirely sucked out of the room. Ashley was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles white, her eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall. For the entirety of your miserable marriage, David, you have operated under the assumption that my wealth was your ultimate safety net. Harrison continued, his tone methodical and punishing. You believed that no matter how many businesses you bankrupted, no matter how much debt you accumulated trying to impress your country club friends, the inheritance would eventually bail you out. You assumed that because Barbara was my daughter, you were inherently entitled to the empire I built. Harrison paused, letting the silence hang over the room like the blade of a guillotine. You assumed wrong, he stated. Arthur handed Harrison the first document from the stack. Harrison held it up for the entire room to see. This is the official, notarized and court-approved revocation of my previous will, Harrison announced. Effective as of 9 o'clock yesterday morning, any and all provisions, trusts, stipends and inheritance clauses previously naming David Wilson, Barbara Wilson, or Ashley Wilson as beneficiaries have been permanently voided. You are entirely disinherited. You will not receive a single cent of liquid capital. You will not receive a single share of stock. You will not receive access to any family properties, vehicles, or collateral assets. A sharp, hysterical wail ripped from Barbara's throat. She threw her head back against her chair, her hands clutching at her hair in pure, unadulterated devastation. Dad, no, Barbara shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her absolute ruin. You cannot do this. We will have nothing. The bank is foreclosing on the house. The yacht is being seized. We have no savings. We will be out on the street. Please, Dad, I am your daughter. You cannot leave us with nothing. You left yourselves with nothing the second you decided to steal from your own child, Harrison replied, his voice completely devoid of pity. You made your choices, Barbara. Now you get to live in the reality you created. Harrison turned his attention to David, who was still kneeling on the hardwood floor, utterly paralyzed by the complete vaporization of his financial future. And you, David, Harrison said, the disgust in his voice palpable. You thought you could forge my name. You thought you could use my assets to secure a luxury vessel to impress men who despise you. The second this meeting concludes, Arthur is submitting the Marine Registry records and the forged guarantor documents directly to the federal authorities. You will be dealing with the FBI, the Small Business Administration, and the IRS simultaneously. I suggest you find a very good, very cheap public defender. David let out a broken, pathetic sob, burying his face in his hands. The proud, arrogant patriarch of the Wilson family was entirely broken, reduced to a weeping, ruined mess on the floor of his father-in-law's dining hall. Ashley, realizing the absolute finality of the situation, panicked. The golden child who had never faced a single consequence in her entire pampered life suddenly understood that there was no money left to save her. There was no inheritance to pay off her fraudulent loan. The federal agents were coming for her, and she was entirely alone. She leaped up from her chair, knocking it backward onto the floor. She did not look at her weeping mother. She did not look at her kneeling father. She turned and bolted for the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. She was trying to run, desperate to escape the humiliation, the exposure, and the impending federal indictment. She did not make it past the third row of seats. Two massive men in dark suits, members of Grandpa Harrison's private security detail, stepped out from the shadows near the exit. They moved with terrifying speed, blocking the aisle and forming an impenetrable human wall between Ashley and the doors. Ashley slammed into them, letting out a shriek of panic. "Let me go!" she screamed, thrashing wildly against the security guards. "I have to get out of here! Let me go!" "Please return to your seat, Miss Wilson," one of the guards said, his voice flat and authoritative. He did not grab her, but he did not yield a single inch, forcing her backward. "I am not going to prison," Ashley wailed, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent room. She turned and pointed a shaking finger at her parents. "It was their fault. They did the paperwork. They forged the signatures. I did not do anything. They made me do it." The security guards stepped forward, firmly guiding Ashley back down the aisle. She stumbled, sobbing hysterically, and collapsed into an empty chair in the second row, burying her face in her knees. The entire extended family watched the spectacle in absolute horrified silence. The illusion was dead. The truth was ugly, raw, and undeniable. Grandpa Harrison raised his hand again, and the room instantly quieted. He turned his gaze away from the ruined trio in the front rows and looked directly at me. The icy, punishing demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of profound, unwavering respect. "The wealth of this family was built on hard work, integrity, and resilience," Harrison said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "It will not be squandered by parasites, and it will not be destroyed by thieves. It will be protected by the only person in this room who actually understands its value." Harrison picked up the second document from the heavy leather binder. "The entirety of my estate, my commercial real estate holdings, the liquid investment portfolios, and all corporate assets are hereby transferred into an irrevocable blind trust," Harrison announced. "This trust is established solely for the future security and well-being of my great-grandson Leo." A collective gasp swept through the extended family. 50 heads turned simultaneously to look at me standing behind the mahogany podium. The hostility that had radiated from them earlier was completely gone, replaced by a sudden intense awe. "And until Leo reaches the age of 35, Harrison concluded, his voice ringing with absolute finality, "the sole uncontested executor of this multi-million-dollar trust is Chelsea. She will have absolute discretionary control over every asset, every property, and every investment. The future of this family's legacy rests entirely in her hands." The irony was beautiful, sharp, and absolutely devastating. The daughter they had tried to institutionalize, the woman they had labeled a bitter, jealous failure, was now the absolute gatekeeper of the entire family fortune. Before David could raise his head to utter one last desperate plea for mercy, the heavy oak doors at the back of the dining hall were violently pushed open. Special Agent Miller stepped into the room, flanked by 2 armed federal officers, his badge catching the bright midday light. The federal agent's presence immediately sucked whatever remaining oxygen existed right out of the dining hall. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the 3 officers, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the cavernous space. Special Agent Miller did not break his stride. He walked straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked entirely on the front row. The 2 armed officers flanked him, their hands resting comfortably near their utility belts, projecting an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority. David Wilson attempted to stand, but his knees buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the back of the chair in front of him, just to stay upright. His previously immaculate gray suit now looked rumpled, and sweat was visibly pouring down his temples. Agent Miller stopped exactly 3 feet away from the toxic trio. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded warrant. David Wilson, Barbara Wilson, and Ashley Wilson. Agent Miller said, his voice flat, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. You are all being taken into federal custody for questioning regarding multiple counts of aggravated identity theft, interstate wire fraud, and forgery of federal loan documents. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Aunt Susan, who had been screaming in my face just 30 minutes prior, let out a sharp, strangled gasp and pressed both of her hands over her mouth. Uncle Robert, the arrogant investment banker, physically recoiled, taking 3 rapid steps backward, as if standing too close to David might result in a contagious federal indictment. There is a massive misunderstanding here. David stammered, his corporate negotiation voice completely failing him. His tone was high-pitched, panicked, and desperate. I am a respected member of the local business community. I have a team of corporate attorneys on retainer. You cannot simply barge into a private family estate and issue threats. I demand to make a phone call immediately. You will have the opportunity to contact your legal counsel once we arrive at the federal holding facility. Agent Miller replied smoothly, entirely unfazed by David's pathetic attempt at asserting dominance. There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Wilson. We have secured the digital routing numbers, the forged Small Business Administration guarantor applications, and the fraudulent marine collateral registry. Your accounts were frozen this morning. The evidence is secured. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Barbara let out a noise that sounded like a dying animal. She leaped up from her chair, her lace handkerchief falling to the floor. She pointed a manicured finger at the federal agents. You cannot do this to us! Barbara shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the limestone walls. Do you know who we are? We belong to the Oak Ridge Country Club. We host charity galas. We are respectable, wealthy people. You are supposed to be arresting criminals, not us. My daughter is a victim. She had a traumatic brain injury. She is making all of this up to punish us. Ma'am, I am going to ask you to lower your voice and comply with my officers. Agent Miller stated, his patience visibly wearing thin. The financial records do not lie. We are executing a lawful warrant. Turn around. The 2 armed officers stepped forward, pulling standard-issue steel handcuffs from their belts. The sharp metallic clinking sound of the cuffs being unlatched sliced through the dead silence of the dining hall. The physical reality of the handcuffs completely shattered whatever fragile psychological restraint Ashley had left. The beige sweater she had worn to play the traumatized victim now looked like a prison uniform. She scrambled backward, tripping over the legs of her chair and crashing to the floor. She scrambled backward like a crab, pressing her back against the mahogany paneling of the podium. Do not touch me! Ashley screamed, her vocal cords straining, tears streaming down her pale, makeup-free face. I did not do it. I am just the face of the brand. I am a lifestyle influencer. I do not know anything about taxes or federal loans. They did it. She thrust a shaking finger directly at her parents. They told me to sign the papers. Ashley wailed, completely throwing the people who had funded her entire life straight under the bus. My mother brought the tax returns to my apartment. My dad forged the signatures. They told me Chelsea owed us the money. I am a victim of terrible parenting. You cannot take me to jail. I have a sensitive stomach. I cannot eat prison food. David's head snapped toward his daughter, his eyes wide with absolute fury and betrayal. You ungrateful, spoiled parasite, David roared, completely abandoning his stoic father persona. We risked decades in federal prison to fund your pathetic vanity project because you were too lazy to get a real job. We paid for your luxury vacations. We paid for your designer clothes. And you throw us to the federal authorities to save your own skin. You forced me to do it! Barbara screamed, turning on David and shoving him hard in the chest. You told me we had to keep up appearances. You told me we needed the boat to impress your pathetic friends at the club. You forged my father's signature because you are a weak, insecure failure of a man. You destroyed my life. The 3 of them stood in the center of the dining hall, surrounded by 50 horrified relatives and 3 federal agents viciously tearing each other apart. They screamed, they sobbed, and they aired decades of toxic resentments, financial insecurities, and deep-seated narcissism. They blamed everyone but themselves. Agent Miller nodded to his officers. Enough. Secure them. The officers moved in. They grabbed David's arms, twisting them behind his back. The heavy metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the room. David slumped forward, his entire body going limp in defeat. Another officer grabbed Barbara gently but firmly, forcing her arms behind her back. She sobbed hysterically, her knees giving out, forcing the officer to physically support her weight. The second officer hauled Ashley up from the floor, ignoring her shrieks of protest, and secured her wrists in cold steel. "Let us go," Agent Miller commanded. The federal officers marched the toxic trio down the center aisle of the dining hall. It was the ultimate devastating walk of shame. The 50 extended family members, the very people who had gathered to judge me, to institutionalize me, and to force me into submission, now pressed themselves tightly against their chairs to avoid accidentally brushing against the criminals. Cousin Greg stared at the floor, his face bright red with humiliation, unable to look at the woman he had aggressively defended just an hour ago. Aunt Susan was weeping silently, her carefully constructed social hierarchy entirely incinerated. Uncle Robert looked pale and sick, acutely aware that his own reputation was now forever tainted by association. David, Barbara, and Ashley were pushed through the heavy oak doors. Their shrieks, protests, and vicious insults echoed down the long marbled hallway, growing fainter and fainter as they were marched out the front doors and down the grand stone driveway. The heavy thud of the estate doors closing behind them cut off the noise entirely. The chaos abruptly faded, leaving a profound ringing silence in the grand hall. The air in the room felt instantly lighter, as if a massive, suffocating pressure had been vented into the atmosphere. The heavy, dark cloud of manipulation, gaslighting, and manufactured drama that had choked this family for decades had finally been dragged out of the building in handcuffs. Grandpa Harrison stood at the podium. He did not look angry. He simply looked tired but resolute. He scanned the faces of the extended family members, who were still seated in stunned, horrified silence. "This formal review is concluded," Harrison said, his voice quiet, but carrying absolute authority. "Those of you who chose to blindly support thieves, those of you who participated in the harassment of my granddaughter today, I strongly suggest you take a long, hard look at your own lives. Your presence is no longer required on my property. Leave." The extended family scrambled to comply. Nobody spoke a single word. They gathered their coats and their expensive handbags, keeping their heads down, and filed silently out the side doors. Aunt Susan did not look at me. Uncle Robert did not offer any patronizing advice. They scuttled out of the room like scolded children, thoroughly humiliated and entirely broken. Within 5 minutes, the massive dining hall was completely empty save for Grandpa Harrison and myself. I stood behind the podium, letting out a long, slow breath. The dull, throbbing ache in my fractured collarbone was still there, but the crushing weight of anxiety that had lived in my chest for the past 6 years was completely gone. I felt light. I felt invincible. Harrison stepped down from the podium and walked over to me. He placed a warm, heavy hand on my uninjured shoulder. He did not need to say anything. The look in his eyes communicated decades of pride, respect, and deep unconditional love. We had weathered the storm together, and we had won. The side door near the kitchens opened softly. Maria, the estate's longtime head housekeeper, stepped into the room. In her arms she held a bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and walked directly toward me. "He just woke up from his nap," Maria whispered softly, transferring the warm, heavy bundle into my uninjured right arm. "He has been an absolute angel all morning." I looked down at baby Leo. He blinked up at me, his big, bright eyes focusing on my face. He let out a soft, happy coo and reached a tiny, chubby hand up to grasp a strand of my hair. A fierce, overwhelming wave of protective love washed over me. This was the reason I had fought so hard. This was the reason I had endured the smear campaigns, the threats, and the isolation. I had done it to ensure that this beautiful, innocent child would never have to grow up in the toxic shadow of David, Barbara, and Ashley Wilson. "Come with me." Chelsea Harrison said softly, gesturing toward the heavy glass doors at the far end of the hall. I held Leo tightly against my chest and followed my grandfather. We stepped out through the glass doors and onto the massive stone balcony that overlooked the rear of the estate. The midday sun was shining brightly, casting a warm golden glow over the rolling green lawns, the ancient oak trees, and the sparkling blue waters of the private lake in the distance. The air smelled of pine and fresh rain. The estate was perfectly quiet, the only sound being the gentle rustling of leaves in the light breeze. I stood on the balcony, resting my uninjured arm against the cool stone railing, holding my son close to my heart. I looked out over the vast property, a property that would one day belong to the child in my arms, protected by a trust that could never be touched by greed or manipulation. The toxic weight of my past was entirely permanently gone. The people who had tried to destroy my mind, my credit, and my future were currently sitting in the back of federal transport vehicles, facing decades of ruin. They could no longer hurt me. They could no longer silence me. I looked up at Grandpa Harrison, who was watching the horizon with a look of profound, cleansing peace. I looked down at Leo, who was smiling and grabbing at the sunlight. I took a deep breath of the fresh, clean air. I had survived the fire, and standing here on the balcony, looking out over our future, I finally knew exactly what it felt like to be safe. I had found my true family, and our lives were just beginning. Looking back on the ashes of my past, the most profound realization is this: sharing DNA with someone does not grant them a lifelong license to abuse, manipulate, or steal from you. For 34 years, I was conditioned to believe that family loyalty meant silent suffering. Society teaches us to keep the peace, to forgive every transgression, and to protect the family name at all costs. But I learned the hard way that when you prioritize a toxic family's reputation over your own survival, you are participating in your own destruction. The people who were supposed to protect me tried to steal my future and rewrite my reality to cover their crimes. They weaponized my trauma, used gaslighting as a daily language, and demanded my absolute compliance. The hardest lesson I had to learn was that standing up for the truth requires you to walk through the fire of their manufactured outrage. You must be willing to let their carefully crafted illusions burn to the ground. If you are trapped in a cycle of family abuse, know this: your boundaries are your armor. Document everything, trust your own mind, and do not let their volume drown out your truth. True family is not defined by birth certificates or shared holidays. It is defined by unconditional respect, honesty, and safety. You have the right to walk away from the people who hurt you, and you have the power to build a beautiful, peaceful life from the wreckage they leave behind. Share your own journey of setting boundaries and walking away from toxicity in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join a community dedicated to surviving, healing, and reclaiming your power.